Did I vote for Brexit? Yeah, of course. That's what it is.
Right, I think we're all just about in the room. We're an industry that, of course, we love to start on time, so I'll do my very best to get the proceedings off.
Mark, this is about 3 minutes early, and trains never ever are supposed to start.
You know, so often
That's a bit rich from you.
but they lock the doors 2 minutes before it goes. Good morning, everybody. Very, very warm welcome to All Change, Braille under the new UK government. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here on behalf of Cogitamus Limited and the Rail Forum, and I hope we're going to have an interesting, informative and engaging day. Some of you won't know who Cogitamus are and what we are. We're a public affairs, media relations and stakeholder engagement company. We've been trading for 17 years, and much of our work, in fact the vast majority of our work, is in transport and rail, and we're long-standing and proud members of the Rail Forum, and are delighted to have partnered with Rail Forum for this event. I've got immense thanks to start off with, first of all to the Cogitamus team for organising this event in 3 weeks flat from when we first conceived of doing it, and to Gemma and Rail Forum for running our golden ticket scheme to bring as many Rail Forum member companies in as possible. A few notes on safety and so on. You found your way in, so hopefully you can find your way out safely in the event of any fire alarms going off. But we've also gone to a huge amount of trouble, partly because I'm paranoid about this, to deal with any dietary requirements and allergies when it comes to the serving of the food. So hopefully we've catered for everybody. But in the unlikely event that you can't find anything to your taste at lunchtime, please don't touch it, just let us know and we'll go and order something specially for you to make sure everybody gets home safely. Now, organising this event was a bit of a gamble, because we knew the date of the King's speech, the 17th of July. We knew, based on probability, Labour was probably going to win the general election. So we were conscious that they published their rail policy on the 25th of April. And so there was a fair chance that we might see the inclusion of rail legislation in the King's speech. But it might not have happened. We might have had yet another round of consultation, folks, on rail reform. And I know how pleased you would have all been to see that happen after what's been going on for the last 6 years. But in fact, we had more railways bills than you can shake a stick at, really, or rail and transport related bills announced in the Queen's speech on Wednesday. And in the King's speech, thank you. We'll be coming on to that very shortly. But we also took a gamble on speakers. And we were ever so pleased that we thought our gamble had paid off, in that we were going to have the presence of the Welsh Minister for Transport and North Wales, Ken Skates, who right up until last night was going to be here in person. But as you may have noticed, there have been some changes in Welsh politics in the last few days. Ken is now the Minister for the Economy, as well as Transport and North Wales, and unfortunately he's had to send his apologies. So what we have done, and I'll show you here, is we've taken the opportunity to revise the programme a little bit. And that means that we'll be finishing half an hour earlier than was originally planned. So I do hope, nevertheless, and in fact perhaps even because of this, that as many of you as possible will be able to stay for the whole day to hear all of our panel contributions, especially as the panellists have worked hard to prepare their addresses to you, and we've got a fantastic lineup of panellists through the day. As well as being here in person, thanks to Phoebe and Oliver at the back, we are streaming this event live over the magic of the interweb, and we'll be recording it for later publication. And we are, you can't say tweeting anymore, we're Xing the event. My colleague Neil Lindsay is Xing away, and we're using the hashtag all change rail. So that's the. Please do follow us on X at Cogitamus PA and use the hashtag. Now, I mentioned gambling earlier. Gambling was in the news quite a lot recently. Gambles that pay off and don't. Another cosmic force is the force of coincidence, I find. And so here we are holding our event in the constituency of the new Prime Minister, in the Holborn and St Pancras constituency of Sir Keir Starmer. But it's also an amazing coincidence for me, because for me, where we are right now is the old neighbourhood. This is where my family are from. And in fact, my family, my father's family, lived right behind this hotel, and this place, the Oselton estate, and which I took this photograph from the top of this hotel a few years ago. And the thing about my family, and something that sort of conditioned my life really, is that from the earliest age, I was conscious that everybody worked on the railway. Not only my father's family, who lived on the Oselton, but my mother's family, who lived about a mile up the Caledonian Road, also all worked on the railways as well. Because this part of London, of course, has been shaped by railways and by the existence of the major London terminals. In fact, this very hotel where we are meeting today stands on the site that was once occupied by my favourite toy shop. So as a child, I used to be taken to gaze through the windows of the toy shop that stood on this corner, and in those days looking enviously at the various bits of Jerry Anderson merchandise that were on display. And in an early example of lobbying success, I think I managed to persuade a grandparent or a parent to buy me a Stingray water pistol. So that was the first deployment of my persuasive skills. But the thing about this part of London is that, as I've said, there were the major terminals all the way along the road, and many of the people who lived in this part of London, including members of my family, worked at this place, which is the Somers Town Goods Yard, which was situated right next to St Pancras Station, and was a huge area of activity and commerce for North London, and bringing materials and supplies and food and drink in from the Midlands and the North. It's where the British Library now stands. My own first job interview was in St Pancras Station, in what is now, amazingly, was formerly the area manager's office and is now Cersei's restaurant and wine bar. And to me, there is a point in all of this, you'll be pleased to know. This is not just a trip down memory lane. Because to me, what the experience of this part of London shows, and in my life and family experience here, is the transformational effect of railway investment and infrastructure development on the economy. You've only got to look along this street, along the Euston Road, to see the high-rise buildings, see the transformation at St Pancras brought about by the arrival of HS1 and then the construction of Thameslink, to see the power of railway infrastructure investment. There was a similar story at King's Cross when the station there was transformed in readiness for the 2012 London Games, and now is an incredibly modern, vibrant destination in its own right, as well as an important London terminal and interchange. And one thing I want to say is there's a third terminal in the Euston Road, and it's in a pretty sad state at the moment, and that's Euston Station. And I think with the new government, we should have the Trinity. We should have King's Cross, St Pancras and Euston. Euston ready to fulfil its potential, not just for the economy of London, but for what London through HS2 can do for the Midlands, the north of England, North Wales and Scotland. Now, I mentioned a gamble early on legislation and not having any more consultations. We had loads of bills announced in the King's speech, and we're familiar with already, I think, with some of them. The Passenger Railway Services Public Ownership Bill, which fulfills Labour's manifesto pledge to restore or return to public ownership the franchised train operating companies. The bill that was in fact published yesterday, so announced in the Queen's speech on Wednesday, published in the King's speech. Thank you. I'm going to start doing it deliberately now. In the King's speech on Wednesday, and then published yesterday. And we also have the promise of a railways bill in the King's speech, which will implement further, more extensive rail reform. There's the modified high-speed rail bill, which will be used in a different way, not resuscitating HS2, but used to deliver other infrastructure schemes in the north. And there's related legislation, a planning and infrastructure bill, a better buses bill, of course, because we shouldn't lose sight of the importance of integration of rail with other public transport modes, an English devolution bill, which will lead to increased powers over transport for metro mayors, but also even additional powers in those areas of England which don't have metro mayors. And not to lose sight of a digital information and smart data bill as well, given the importance of data and digital systems and communications to the rail industry today. Now, this is a bit small and fiddly, I'm afraid, but hopefully you'll get the drift. And this table is a modification of something we produced at the time of the Conservatives announcing their rail reform agenda in May 2021. We reckoned that had the Conservatives been minded to, they could have got their legislation implemented in about 230 days from its publication. In fact, of course, it was never implemented, as we know. So whereas it could have been in place by early 2022, it never got beyond the draft bill stage. But we'll put this table onto our website, and we'll also update it to take account of parliamentary recesses and so on. But what it shows is the stages. Bills just don't happen. They have to be scrutinised and analysed by both houses of Parliament. And there are opportunities for stakeholders, industry players, trade associations and the like to make representations not just to the government but also to the opposition parties as the bill makes its way through Parliament. Because we know in the rail industry just how important this is. We know this is a fantastic industry. We know that we deliver for customers, and whether they're passengers or freight customers, day to day, day in, day out, week in, week out. But we also know that there are enormous challenges that face this industry and improvements that need to be made. For too many people, the railways as passengers are just inaccessible still, particularly if they're coping with some kind of mobility impairment. We know that for too many people, the railways are expensive to use. We know that for too many people, the railways are confusing to use. Only yesterday, coming here, it was almost like a case study. I was sat next to a chap who was using the train for the first time. And when he was asked by the guard for his ticket, he had the wrong ticket. Fortunately, in a sense, he was kind of let off. The guard was understanding. But that was this person's first encounter with using the rail service, and they had the wrong ticket, and there was the possibility of being charged a second time. So it's confusing, and also, as Labour addressed in its rail policy that was published on the 25th of April, for too many people still travelling by train is a frightening experience as well. You can feel isolated, alone, vulnerable, especially if travelling late at night, and especially if you're a shift worker, perhaps carrying out an essential service. So these are some of the things that I hope we'll be touching on today in our panel discussions, and that need to be addressed as the industry goes forward under the new legislative framework. And as part of that, I should say that what we hope to do is write up the things that are discussed today into a bit of a report, and we'll give that to parliamentarians and the government so that this process that we go through today doesn't just end today, that we capture something from it and take it forward and hopefully inform the legislative process. Now, thankfully, you'll be pleased to learn my 15 minutes are almost up. But,
Sorry, Mark, just on that slide, which is really helpful.
Yeah.
230 days, when do you think in normal calculus that bill will become law?
So that would mean if it's had its first reading and publication yesterday, they could conceivably have a second reading next week.
Yeah.
Haven't seen the business for next week yet.
It's in for week after next week.
Is it? Right, okay, so because the session's running to the 30th, so they're going to have the second reading before the summer recess. Presumably then they'd be into this bit, the Public Bill Committee stage in September, when Parliament comes back before the party conferences. So they could be through that and into the House of Lords before Christmas, and it could conceivably, with a fair wind, be law maybe February, March, something like that, I would have thought. I mean, any government can achieve anything it wants to, even faster than that, if it's really determined to. But certainly this has clearly been addressed as a government priority in the King's Speech and in the obvious speed with which this has been taken forward. Which leads me neatly to the fact that to get laws passed in Parliament, we need members of Parliament to vote for them, but also to scrutinise them and to ensure that they are fit for purpose. And I'm delighted to say that we have a Member of Parliament here to address us now. So it's a very great pleasure to welcome Catherine Atkinson MP, who was elected to represent Derby North at the general election on the 4th of July. Catherine is already, even in advance of being elected, has been confronted with campaigning issues and challenges facing the rail industry in Derby and the surrounding region. And Catherine brought to that work her very considerable skills and advocacy as a barrister for, I believe, for some 17 years, and also as the chair of the Society of Labour Lawyers. So Catherine, it's a great pleasure to welcome you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I am very much a newly arrived MP, finding my way around where to hang my sword. Yes, they still have sword hangers. Which side of the tea room I'm allowed to sit in. And still yet to make my maiden speech, though after 3 children, I'm pretty sure I don't qualify as a maiden. But what qualifies me to be at this very impressive event with so much experience and knowledge? I think I had 46 years in the rail industry. I think, Elaine, it was 30 years today. But what qualifies me is that I share your commitment to rail. In fact, I feel the railway runs through the missions that this new government has set itself. And you would expect to hear nothing less from a Derby Labour MP. The first Derby Labour MP, who was, by the way, the first Labour MP in England, was a railwayman. And I think he would have been very pleased that over the century since he came to Parliament, so many of you travelled here not only by rail, but in trains built in Derby. And you're probably going to have to forgive me for being a bit Derby-centric. But I do acknowledge that some trains are built elsewhere, but often with components from the supply chain in Derby and Derbyshire. So there's nearly always a little bit of Derby in there. And I arrive standing on the shoulders of many others who have spent many years calling and planning for change. And it's exciting now to be in a position where I feel we're pushing at an open door when it comes to rail reform. My Labour colleagues have in Parliament been describing a rail system broken by a lack of strategic direction and a government without an industrial strategy. And I'm relieved that this is a situation that is being reversed on both counts. And it's not just politicians in isolation. The power behind those calls have come from those in industry who have either independently or alongside the front bench been calling for change. Events like this, where industry can come together and discuss the future, are key to shaping the sort of modern railway that modern Britain demands. And I don't need to tell any of you how important this government's economic aspiration is. It's how important this government's economic aspiration is. A sector that employs 250,000 people and is worth over 10 billion, much more if you include metro services and stations. And that contribution to the economy is multiplied many times over when you understand that it connects the country's people, products, and places. The result of the election is that this government has a large mandate when it comes to its policy platform, and it means business when it comes to the speed at which that's being implemented, as I think Mark has very much set out. And this conference is timely, gamble, as it may have been the result of 2 days after at least 2 bills on rail were announced in the King's Speech. Firstly, as has been mentioned, the Passenger Railway Services Public Ownership Bill, delivering the manifesto promise to bring rail back into public ownership. And the aim is to put passengers at the heart of the operation. And as Mark has said, one that was already published yesterday. And second, the Rail Reform Bill, which will ensure that this vision comes to life and will keep it quite literally on track. It's the bill to create the new arm's-length public body with the aim of making sure that infrastructure and services work in harmony. Now, of course, that new body is Great British Railways and is based in Derby.
Yeah.
And I hope that it will make us effectively the rail capital of Britain. And there may be representatives from other towns who are pretenders to that throne, but let's be clear, it was from the throne in the House of Lords that the King announced the Rail Reform Bill and the headquarters are going to be in Derby. And as an integral part of the Rail Reform Bill is the setting out of a statutory duty on Great British Rail to promote rail freight. And there will also be a shadow body established to unite key industry bodies and create an improved approach to industrial relations. For both passengers and freight, the government's creation of a modern rail system will fundamentally change the way that a modern Britain operates, driving growth, transitioning to net zero, and providing employment opportunities. And while we all move to decarbonise, coal freight may fall. With the planning reform that the government has announced, levels of construction freight may increase. And while there may not have been the return to the same levels of commuter rail since 2019 levels, we have seen an increase in leisure travel. Modernisation is coming. And to quote our excellent Transport Secretary, we really must move fast and fix things. But I believe we can also have the stability and the clarity that I know the industry will want. Rolling stock manufacturers such as Alstom are a key example of this need for stability. The site in Derby is a major employer in our city, and thousands of jobs at Alstom and in the supply chain were lost because of the production gap. I think nearly 1,000 workers of welding experience walked out of its doors in a single day. And it is, of course, a relief to see the order for the building and maintenance of 10 Elizabeth Line trains, but it simply doesn't go far enough, because businesses like Alstom and other manufacturers represented in this room need ongoing, reliable pipeline of work. And yes, we need new train orders and network upgrades to bring the growth, jobs and skills. Yes, for passengers, new infrastructure is desperately needed in all corners of the country. And tackling regional inequality that persists and promoting social mobility for everyone is vital. But it cannot be the feast and famine, the boom and bust that we have seen for far too long. And this is a lesson I know has been learned. And the government will be looking to flatten the curve so that there is a steady pipeline of work in the future. And it needs to be part of that wider industrial strategy. As I said, rail runs through all of Labour's missions. Our railways have a far wider impact than just the networks that they operate on. Modern rail can ensure a woman's safety by making sure that they travel home safely at night. It can increase social mobility by connecting people to different jobs and to new opportunities. And it can reduce our dependency on cars and clean the air that we breathe. And it can improve the mental health of those who, without rail, are very far from family and friends. We need a system that is reliable, affordable, and efficient. We need a system that empowers everyone. And I do not underestimate the challenges, whether that be on industrial relations or the legacy of the pandemic or the decisions or lack of decisions that we inherited from the last government. But I do believe that these can and will be overcome by working together, which is why I, and I'm sure you, are here. And you don't just have me, you have a whole new group of backbench Labour MPs who, many of whom I know very well, and many of whom I know are extremely willing to be able to put in the hard work in committee and with ministers to ensure that the next months and years go well for rail. It is what passengers, rail workers and businesses all need and deserve. And I look forward to working with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. You've kindly agreed to take a couple of questions before you have to dash off for the train.
That was with the very clear proviso that pretty much everyone in here knows a lot more about rail than I do.
So, any takers? Yes, Martin.
Martin Osmond in the track. Yeah, also thinking about the newly or recently elected mayor of that region in terms of the East Midlands region.
Claire Ward.
And then thinking, yeah, exactly, and then thinking about devolution.
Yeah.
What does that mean for our industry in that region?
Well, I'm hoping it will bring a more strategic input. I think often there was the frustration that with Derby and Leicester and Nottingham, there wasn't always everyone singing from the same hymn sheet. I think that while the budget that the East Midlands mayoralty has been given is a fraction of what was cut from the East Midlands, I do think that the ability to have a greater focus on strategic thinking across the different local authorities across the whole region is something that I hope will be a really important step forward in because I think we are having to, and we do want to travel at pace, but when you're able to have those strategic discussions and decisions, hopefully that will be at pace in the right direction.
Rupert.
I just wanted to pick up on a phrase you used, which was UK rail capital. I really like that. Please bang that down.
I may have said it a few times before. I very much intend to keep saying it.
Was it Tom? Just one more from Tom.
Tom Harris. If I hadn't been defeated in 2015, we would be parliamentary colleagues.
I was defeated too.
I was a Labour MP for 14 years. I was the Railways Minister under Tony and Gordon. So my question is particularly about Parliament. Congratulations, Ben.
Thank you.
Do you have because of the railway background of your constituency, I mean, do you have a particular ambition to serve at the DFT, or will you be putting your name forward for the Transport Select Committee? And apologies for putting you on the spot.
I think I'm so excited by the agenda of what we have in government. Frankly, if they asked me to be Minister for Paperclips, I'd probably say but I think that for me, I will certainly express an interest for the Bill Committee. I think that I would really like to be able to play my part, and I'll certainly be having discussions as to whether or not I could give effective voice to committees elsewhere.
Just one more? Christian.
I'm the nasty journalist here, so it's a slightly difficult question here.
I should have stopped it.
What generally can a government do about Alstom and the fact that it's
although weekday usage has been suppressed, we have seen a huge increase in leisure travel. And we've also had huge developments in the last year on passenger infrastructure related with the northern leg of HS2 cancelled, but phase one still going on, all of which I'm sure will be discussed later in the panel. But without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our panel today, who will help us make sense of some of the issues that we need to discuss. To my right is Joost Noorderer, the Customer Experience and Commercial Director of the Western Partnership. We've got Jason Prince from the Urban Transport Group, Stephen Goss at the Campaign for Better Transport, and Sarah Chilton from the Community Rail Network. So each panellist will take 5 minutes to explore some of the themes on the Passenger Railway, and then we will open for questions. So, Sarah, if I can. Are you right here? Yes, absolutely. You're first in the alphabet, Sarah, so you're being picked on first, unfortunately.
And I did just slightly in awe of all the experience and knowledge in the room that I am standing in for our chief executive. I'm a poor substitute, so I hope I will do it justice. So, like everyone else, we welcome that Transport features so highly on the King's seat. We feel progress to improve both rail and bus services, so we're delighted at that. I'd just like to begin by almost challenging the title of the session and the much discussion around the use of passengers. Because we need to talk much more around the passengers of the future. We need to be looking much more broadly when we're talking about placing passengers at the centre of rail reform, because it is about the whole community and how it ensures it listens to those communities it serves, and particularly how we engage with passengers and people who are not actually using the railway, because there are a hell of a lot of them that are not using them for a variety of reasons that I'll touch upon. So, and that is really critical, I think, to making the rail much more accessible, much more inclusive, and also achieving modal shift and getting more passengers on board. So we need to look at passengers who are broad instead of those who aren't using the rail. I think from the community rail perspective, we would like to see much more of a built-in mechanism and culture shift that really does embed community engagement in policy development and policy delivery, with communities treated very much as meaningful partners when it comes to contracts, to franchising, to evolution deals. We really do see that we should have equal partner, and that certainly hasn't necessarily been the case thus far. And we know that investment in community-led projects really does get a great return on investment. Something we often hear from our members is for a desire for government to play a more leading role, a bolder role in terms of encouraging that modal shift of behaviour change. And obviously we've seen lots from this government in the 2 weeks so far that bolder approach may well be taken. But transport behaviours are deeply entrenched in terms of people and their attachment to the car. So it's about how do we break down those barriers, and how do we draw on our communities to find the solutions to change those behaviours. I think, as I've already said, we're really encouraged by what the government has said so far. They have, to use the phrase, moved at pace, and I've heard that so much, moving pace is mission driven. So they have moved at pace in terms of introducing various pieces of legislation. They've outlined some key policy and priority areas around reliability, simplification, affordability, accessibility and integration. So if I just go through each of those priorities and touch on those from a community rail perspective, I think if we address all those 5 or 6 priorities, that would really empower our members to speak much more confidently about rail than they currently do. So I think that would be really fantastic. But in terms of reliability, for example, we should be approaching a little bit more of a holistic way than simply thinking, as important as it is, to minimise train delays and cancellations. So looking at having well-publicised travel alternatives at stations, or simply offering good lighting and waiting spaces, which all help to provide additional reassurance to passengers. We'd also state that leisure journeys are often overlooked and not seen as time sensitive. However, we do lots of work to promote tourism and leisure, and if these initiatives are to work, then there has to be trust and reliability, because juggling 3 kids in a buggy when the train is cancelled in many ways is a little bit more difficult than if you usually can go and work at home for the day. So I think we need to think of it in a little bit more of a nuanced way. Cost is the issue that comes up time and again in terms of public transport, obviously in particular to rail. Worries about the price of tickets are then compounded by the anxiety around the ticketing process and how you purchase a ticket or get the wrong ticket, and then the penalties you face when you get the wrong ticket. So I think there needs to be much more of a concerted effort with industry, government and other transport to better understand what that affordability means, and ensure that public transport is a better deal than jumping in the car, and that isn't the case at the moment. So it's combining simpler ticketing across and also across different modes as well. One of the things that we're often told is that railways are for rich people, and that that seems quite odd, but that's naturally the case. Integration, I think we need sort of a step change across transport to integrate modes with greater priority given to joining up the sustainable inclusive modes across the piece. In our experience, transport is planned very much in silos and sort of modal integration severely lacking unless you're living in a big city, and even there it can be lacking. So we need some really clear leadership to really ensure that transport operators and authorities have a focus on collaboration and not competition, which is clearly not the case now. So we need a top-down and bottom-up approach. And then just finally, in terms of accessibility and inclusion, obviously everyone would agree that we need priority and emphasis to enable everyone in society to access the rail, and again that is the case at the moment. So more needs to be done by national strategies, driving progress, but also about supporting localised engagement and working through these different needs and lived experience. So we really call on the government to adopt that co-production method, to place those with lived experience at the centre of policy making and delivery, and adopt a pan disability approach to maximise the inclusion benefits. So embracing that local knowledge and community knowledge that will enable those strategies to reflect the community needs and are more likely to spark that behaviour change, which is so critical.
Sarah. And I might use my liberty as chair just to ask you, rail in rural communities, what steps do you think the government can take during this legislative process to kind of ensure that can happen? Are you excited about the English devolution bill, for example, and the impact that can have on areas that maybe don't have metro mayors?
Yeah, I think we are excited by devolution. I think I'm from Manchester, so I looked at the work that, I don't know if we'll talk about it, and has achieved it and will continue to achieve. But again, we have to ensure that communities are at the table, and often even in some of the devolution areas, that isn't the case. And unless you have a transport system that reflects the community needs, then you will always miss large cohorts of people. And again, I come back to the issue around price, which is a barrier.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. And I will turn to next on the alphabet, which is Stephen from Transport.
Thank you. I'm sure each of us could fill these 45 minutes with our thoughts on the current situation, but I'll try and restrict myself to the 5 minutes that have been allocated. To say that the rail industry has had a difficult few years is something of an understatement, I think. While operators continue to do their best, in spite of the COVID impact, rolling strikes and the Treasury, Britain's railways are no longer fit for purpose. The inconsistencies in service, reliability, fares and rolling stock quality highlight the need for substantial reform. A centralised approach to promoting rail travel and standardisation can lead to the growth and improvement in usage of rail services that we all want to see. The plan for rail was published in 2021 with a promise to focus on 4 key areas: changing the rail system, replacing the existing passenger services contracts, improving passenger experiences and reforming the rail workforce. And while the Great British Railways transition team was created around the same time, with the path to finding Great British Railways, we're still waiting for. Campaign for Better Transport has been fully supportive of GPR, from the concept of a guiding line to the railways as a means by which to achieve those objectives. It wasn't until February this year that we finally got pre-legislative scrutiny on a draft bill to deliver GPR. And before we got very far, we now find ourselves with an entirely new government proposing potentially sweeping reforms, about which we're all excited. So this morning I shall briefly give you Campaign for Better Transport's priorities for rail reform, the implications of the King's speech, and what we hope to see as a result of the legislation that has been announced this week. I think we all agree that it's clear that centralisation and a coherent promotion of rail travel as a whole is necessary now if the railways are going to recover from COVID and to drive forward. So ensuring consistency between services and operators is crucial for building trust among passengers and simplifying their journey. Services and fares should be easy to understand, reducing confusion, confusion and increasing satisfaction among passengers. Mark touched on the confusion this morning that all passengers face, and Sarah's touched on as well the fact that it's daunting for many people to actually get the train. I'm from Belfast, as the accent might suggest. I currently live in Reading, and shortly after I moved down here, I wanted to get the train into London, went to the ticket machine in the station, and was offered various choices, but London All terminals at £14 or London All terminals at £26. So naturally I went for the cheaper option. Got the time didn't knowing to find that I had the wrong ticket and had to pay excess fare. I got there. And this is just a personal anecdotal example, but this happens countless times across the country and for various different people. Therefore, reform of rail fares and ticketing is long overdue. With the need to drive economic growth, tackle the cost of living crisis, reduce congestion, and drive down carbon emissions, it is now more vital than ever that people find it easy, affordable, and appealing to use the railways. In our report, A Fairer Future for Rail, published in October last year, we demonstrated that price and increased working from home since the pandemic are fundamental factors in people travelling by train less. This has led to change in demand for tickets. So as a result, there has been a 64% decline in journeys made with season tickets compared to pre-pandemic. 46% of journeys were made with off-peak tickets last year compared to 35% in 2019. So again, as Sarah's point about leisure travel, I think is a little more important now, is that is increasingly why people are using the train. Off-peak is now the most commonly used ticket type. The current fare structure is the result of complicated regulations and years of layered additional fares without removing others. This puts many potential passengers off. Our research found that 35% of people find fares complicated and confusing. There are 55 million different fares available overall, and 80% of revenue is generated from only 5% of available tickets. There's also a myriad of inconsistencies with fares and divergence between operators. The cost per mile of any time day returns ranges from 15p to 62p for the journey sample. The premium for travelling during peak times as opposed to off-peak ranges from as little as 6% to as much as 132%. The savings from purchasing a weekly season ticket compared to 5-day return tickets ranges from 0 to 53%, and in some cases it is 20% more expensive to buy a monthly season ticket than to buy 4 anytime tickets each way for 4 weeks. What's more, the times when off-peak fares apply vary between operators and can relate to the departure or arrival time. Some also apply afternoon peak times, others don't. The times when rail cards can be used differ, with some applicable all day and others off-peak only. Booking windows for advanced fares sometimes close at 6 p.m. the day before, others operate until a couple of minutes before a train departs. Delay repay is handled separately by individual train companies on compensation differs. The need for reform has long been recognised. However, experimentation on the East Coast Main Line and by ScotRail aside, there has been little effort towards an encompassing overhaul. The cost of taking the train has risen twice as much as the cost of motoring since 1997. Rail fares increases are linked to the retail price index, and fares have consistently increased year on year. On the other hand, fuel duty is also supposed to be in line with RPI, but has effectively been frozen since 2011. As long as fuel duty remains frozen, rail fares should remain frozen. To further drive competition and bring about modal shift, open access should be encouraged for railways. It has been demonstrated how effective it can be, improving services and reducing costs for passengers. Open access operators increase competition, lower fares, and stimulate the introduction of innovative services such as free Wi-Fi on trains. Indeed, 2 leading open access providers, Grand Central and Hull Trains, have had the highest passenger satisfaction ratings in the last couple of years at 96 and 94% respectively. Open access operators such as Limo and Hull Trains have been instrumental in enhancing the passenger offering experience on the East Coast and inland. Open access has given passengers more choice and competitive fare options, ultimately leading to rail overtaking aviation as the primary mode of transport between London and Edinburgh. In 2022, it was announced an open access service was approved for the Great Western Main Line between London and South Wales to start later this year, but the lack of available capacity on the West Coast Main Line has prevented the introduction of open access operators there for years. And so we come to HS2. Although called High Speed 2, the primary function of the project was not to reduce travel times, but to increase capacity. The railways are now carrying more passengers than in 1928, on a route network substantially reduced by gradual closures since the early 30s, and more drastically since the Beeching Acts. The existing UK rail network, most of which was built over a century ago, has struggled to cope with the rapid increase in rail travel over the past 3 decades. HS2 was to shift long distance traffic to the new high-speed line, plus provide additional capacity on the existing network. This would have meant that local, regional and freight services could benefit from reduced congestion, being the more reliable and efficient travel for passengers. The West Coast Main Line, and I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about it, is a breaking point, significantly impacting performance and causing a reduction in timetable resilience. The line reached 96% of pre-COVID passenger numbers in the second quarter of last year and continues to climb, with passenger overcrowding a regular concern. Since April of last year, passenger numbers have been 15% higher than when HS2 was approved. With no alternative plans to increase capacity on the line, cancelling the Manchester leg will exacerbate these capacity issues. What's more, to make matters worse, the idea of HS2 trains running on the existing conventional track, as now proposed, would just reduce capacity, as fewer trains will be able to run in order to accommodate. Without new track capacity, there will also be little scope for permitting open access. Demand for rail travel is projected to grow by up to 3% every year up to 2050. Yet the cancellation of HS2 is expected to lead to an 8% drop in capacity for trains between London and Glasgow, representing around 6,000 fewer seats between London and Manchester today, 4,000 to Liverpool and 2,000 to Glasgow. As a result, experts warn that fares will have to rise to artificially curb demand and prevent severe overcrowding. So, in regards to the King's speech this week, it is good to see that transport is back on the political agenda, with bold assertions on expanding the network and improving the passenger experience. Mark rightly covered all of the bills that deal with transport that were announced on Wednesday, but I'll confine myself to the three directly dealing with the railways. So on the public ownership bill, it proposes to amend existing legislation so that appointing a public sector operator is the default position rather than the last resort. Our position has long been that nationalisation is not required to achieve the reforms necessary. The plan for rail, when announced, offered a model which established the guiding mind that is necessary while harnessing the benefits of the public sector. So we will need to see how the government intends to deliver the new publicly owned railway to judge whether the model is likely to be a success, but we're confident and positive that we will see the reforms necessary as a result. On the railways bill, this bill will hopefully finally pave the way for the much needed reforms of the railways that passengers and the country need. Finally establishing Great British Railways, for which we have long campaigned, should produce a number of reforms, and Sarah's touched on those, and I'm sure we'll cover these in discussion as well. But a big thing that we'd like to see as well as part of the reforms is on timetabling, because at present information is only available 12 weeks in advance, making rail less competitive compared to flying. Train operators should be given the capacity to enable train tickets to be booked through online booking channels much further in advance if long distance rail is going to compete with the aviation industry. And on the the so-called high-speed rail bill, rather than reversing the decision to cancel the second phase of HS2, the new government is repurposing the bill to provide powers to construct and operate rail projects which improve east-west connectivity. We were disappointed that there was no commitment to reinstating the Northern leg of HS2, and while the Labour Party's manifesto did not explicitly mention HS2, and Sir Keir has been careful not to take a stance on it, there have been indications that in private they would be open to considering reintroducing the route between Birmingham and Crewe. Post-election, the new Chancellor said after her first speech on the 8th of July that the government would not rule out entirely the possibility of reinstating the scrap phases of the lines, but the proviso if the money can be found. So there is hope at least there, I think. So since Sunak's cancellation of phases 2A and B, the mayors of Birmingham and Manchester have been cooperating with the consortium to deliver an alternative to HS2, and we're pretty supportive of those efforts. And good to see that a new Liverpool-Manchester Railway Board has been established as well to develop proposals for a high-speed rail link as part of Northern Powerhouse Rail. So a lot to be excited about at the moment. A lot of very encouraging signs coming from the government. And we will continue to work as we have been with stakeholders to bring about the changes that we all want to see on the railway. And we have formed a fares and ticketing forum to work with stakeholders, the AFP and GBRTP, to bring about the reforms that we all need to see in order to improve the passenger experience on the railway. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Hello, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'd asked for the air conditioning to be adjusted.
Okay,
We'll
fantastic.
feel the effects of that shortly.
Brilliant, great. Stephen, I'm just really interested to hear about your research on fares. Obviously, Louise, the Transport Secretary, has talked a lot about fare simplification. How, what impact will that have on passenger satisfaction versus just making fares cheaper for people? I mean, will people feel the real, benefits of fare simplification in your view?
Absolutely, yes. Because if it's easier to buy a ticket, then more people will be inclined to do so. So the fact that it is so confusing and you get different options, whether you buy at a station, at a ticket machine, or online, is a problem. Because operators don't allow sort of independent retailers to sell all the options available. Well, it's an issue, so we need to level the playing field. The simpler it is, the easier it is for passengers, and the more likely they'll come.
Great, and then Jason, if we can turn to you on the city's agenda, but also hear about Urban Transport Group's work on the Maya Commission, which obviously has a huge impact on shaping Labour transport policy. Very interesting to hear your thoughts.
Well, I'm glad that Mark said initially he clarified whether it's Chatham House or not, so that's useful to know as I open up. I mean, I'll be brief. Who is the Urban Transport Group? We're a membership organisation, and surprisingly, we represent city regions across the UK, but we also have members, Transport Wales, Translink, and members in Scotland as well. So we've got a really good UK footprint, and our members serve in excess of 30 million people. And really exciting time, I think, for transport. Hugely exciting time. I think Mr. Mark over there did very well planning the event and the timing of this event to land when there's like 5 transport bills coming down the line. I think for me, and when we talk about the passenger railway first, I have a 4-hour commute to work. So I live in Manchester and I work in Leeds. And I use light rail, and I see Steve over there, and then I use heavy rail to get to work. And you know what? Most of the time, it's all right. I have to say, most of the time, I'd say 9 times out of 10, I find that journey is long. I mean, it would be great if it was quicker, and I can get a TPE. And at the minute, that's marginal savings, and I make that decision. It's the same as a marginal about getting Northern. Trains are decent, the staff are great, and I think that's something we've got to remember. The industry's been in a period of stasis, and the people who work in the industry, whether it's supply chain or the frontline people, they're doing really hard work every day, and they're working in an operating environment with a lot of clarity. But overall, the journey isn't too bad. When you can come to, so I think, well, and that's going intercity. I think what is, for a passenger, what is really bewildering and confusing is I don't think it's a consistent offer that the passenger gets. I mean, I've not been on an Avanti service which has been on time for a long time. And oh my God, that's amazing. I've got an Avanti, and I think that's the frustration that I've got an L in the R and it was 5 minutes early. There's various different reasons. Is it the operator? I mean, is it the infrastructure? I was reading last week, and even while I was doing this panel, I was quite curious to know. There was an issue coming back from Leeds last week. It needed a track inspection. Got on another train. There was a medical emergency. Got on another train. These things happen, and everyone was just like, "Well, this is what it is." And I thought, well, how much is the operator? How much? Because the people who are doing the front line, the guards and the dispatchers are the ones getting grief. And how much is the infrastructure provided? And I think 20% in the last quarter of issues and delays were down to Network Rail. And I think there's a frustration sometimes that who is to blame? Because ultimately, if you're a passenger, you're there at You just see someone who's on the platform. So I think there's something around that. So overall, I think the offer is not consistent, and it comes down to who is the railway serving. Is it serving the passenger, or is it just serving treasury? Because if you're not knowing who your audience and your customer is, then ultimately that's going to impact on what you do. And I don't blame the people who work and operate. Blame's a strong word. I think what's been frustrating is the lack of clarity of where we're going. So I think what's happened this week with the King's speech, number one, it's amazing to get so many transport bills in the King's speech. You remember the first bill presented to Parliament as a rail bill, it's fantastic. I'm a bit of a rail geek, I'm a transport geek, but I don't like to
You're in
share
good
that.
company
Yeah. So I think that's a really good signal of intent what this government wants to do. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited about buses as well, but I know Mark needs to do a thing on buses as well, that would be great. So, and I think what I can see already from speaking to people yesterday is that the OOR annual, jamboree, annual reporting thing, and there was a very different feel to when I went to that event last year, because irrelevant of whether you're an operator, irrelevant of whether you're an infrastructure provider, at last people feel that there's something they can start to coalesce from. Now there will be very different opinions about what that looks like, and Labour's made it clear about what they believe their view will be and the direction of travel. But I think what's positive for the sector and for all of us in the room is that we can now start to work with the government, and we should give them support, I firmly agree, to help. Actually, I don't like to say fix the rails, but just make them better for the passengers, ultimately. And when it comes down to city regions and devolution, maybe this come up in questions and stuff like that. I think it's great that you can bring decision making closer to the people where you live. And I've seen the journey. I'm from Manchester, but I've not always lived there. I've lived in London, lived in Leeds, but I lived out of Manchester before recently moved back. And I think devolution itself is a force for good, and you're starting to see what the outcomes are like within GM, because that went first. And I think I'm keen to see what the English devolution bill is going to do. I think it's going to consolidate powers. I think it feels like we're going in the right direction. And how that will interface with rail, I think is a great opportunity. But I'm conscious of time. I'll leave it there. I'm happy to take any questions on any of those.
I might just hit you off on the English devolution bill, if I may. We've seen in that mayors, local authorities will be given kind of enhanced powers over local transport networks. But at the end of the day, this all comes down to money. And will we see, or do you think we'll see, like we do in Germany and France, regional authorities having a bigger pots of money to create local transport schemes? Are you hoping that that's going to be in the bill? And I wonder what your views are on that.
So we should congratulate in some ways the last administration for what they did on CRSTS, City Route Sustainable Transport Setting. I got that right. So we should congratulate them for bringing forward a longer term capital plan for areas, and I think the trailblazer authorities like West Mids, GM and the North East moving to more consolidated pot of funding can only be a good thing. I think one thing that we have to remember though, the other part, that the next stage of CRSTS 2 and 3 were part of Network North money, which was basically magic money which could have been spent but isn't being spent. And when you look at it in that perspective, then I think we need to see the detail, and obviously it's been great that the mayors have been to number 10 and had a conversation, so I'm optimistic by what, but I would always say sometimes it's not about, it's more about what the mayors are, I think, are beginning to articulate, and to disagree, particularly well, is understanding what the outcomes there are, and what are the mechanisms and how you can deliver that outcome. And what, for example, Andy Burnham's done with the B network in Greater Manchester, on the back of legislation which was brought in under the last administration, and I worked on the Buses Builders Act for 18 months, what that has done is kick-start almost a revolution in integrated transport. by having integrated ticketing now on bus and tram, there soon will be bikes, and then the ambition is. So actually, it's not always about the money. It's about understanding what the consumer wants, and I think that's where devolution, I think, is could and starting to show tangible benefits at a local level and our member authorities.
Thank you so much, Jason. And last but not least, Joost from the West Coast Partnership. Really excited to hear about your views around the customer-centric experience, which you've been sort of at the forefront thinking about the West Coast Partnership, but also obviously how we make the most of HS2 as well, which has come up really on the panel.
So I work for West Coast Partnership Development, and West Coast Partnership Development is a shadow operator for high-speed services. And we're a joint venture of First Group and Trenitalia and our colleagues in Italy. Trenitalia, we have a lot of experience of running high-speed trains, so they run high-speed services in Italy, but now in France and in Spain as well. We advise the government, we advise the DfT, and we work very closely with HS2 and with Network Rail. And I guess we are, what sets us apart is that we're sort of the only company that looks at the long-term benefits of HS2. How can we get the most out of it for customers? How do we maximize the market value? And all our work starts with the customer. Our aim is to deliver the best travel experience for our customers. And one of the ways we do that is to run a customer community along the route. So this is made up of 5,000 people living on the West Coast Main Line, people that travel by rail, but also people that don't use rail often. And we do a lot of customer research with them, and I think my panelists already mentioned all the issues that customers raise with us. Just to name a few of them, value for money fares, making sure that fares are transparent and easy to use, punctual and reliable trains, guaranteed and comfortable seat. I think we've done quite a bit of work with new trains to make sure that the trains are more comfortable, but we need to make sure that high-speed service has a really, really good seat. Good information about their journey, especially when things go wrong or when there is disruption. And we can see now that people expect mobile connectivity as well. And of course, there are a lot of other priorities, but so these are some of the key ones. And I think what is special about high-speed services is that we can resolve a lot of these issues because we have new rolling stock, we have new infrastructure, we're looking at new systems that we're buying on the railway. So we can take some of these issues away from passengers and actually resolve them and design them out. Of course, there's still a lot of dilemmas. Just to name a couple of them, one of them is technology. Technology moves very quickly. 5 years ago, nobody was using TikTok. Everybody's now using it a lot. Takes up a lot of bandwidth. Makes everybody's brains do mush. But we need to take decisions right now because trains are being procured. They're being delivered by Alstom and Hitachi. The infrastructure is being built. Stations are being designed. If you look at Although Common, it's amazing what's being built out there. So we need to take decisions now, even though technology is moving quite fast. Another dilemma that we have is that we have only one train type. We have many, many trains that will use the service, but only one train type. And we need to make sure that that train can be used for relatively short journeys along Birmingham, which will be 45 minutes or so, but also all the way up the West Coast Main Line to Glasgow, which will be more than 4 hours. We need to serve leisure users, dominant market for us, but it will also be business users. So it's making sure that the train is really fit for purpose. And one of the last dilemmas that I want to touch on is we have new infrastructure on the HS2 network. Phase 2A has been cancelled. more reliant on the conventional railway network. So how do we make sure that we have a coherent experience all along the route? And we stop in Crewe and Preston, the experience is also good for passengers. So to sum up, our priority is really about customers. We're not just focused on making sure that HS2 is delivered on time and cost, but making sure that when it runs, we have full trains and that customers really enjoy the journey.
Thank you so much. I think we've got some time for questions, haven't we?
Sure, few minutes.
Few minutes, okay.
Yeah.
Quickly, Rupert.
So, just a very quick question. GBR, franchises come back in. Franchises are pretty much based on 1993 BR business units and passenger flows. Does the creation of GBR provide opportunities for new journey opportunities to east, west, and how do we exploit those?
Yes, that's a very good point, and ideally, yes, it should, because very much you're correct in terms of this still has the same regional system that existed, which is largely based on the old Big Four that were created in 1923 as well. So I think after a century, it's about time we did start thinking about east-west as opposed to just out from London elsewhere.
I think GBR can bring great benefits over the long run. Now, ultimately, it's about what is the outcome for the network. Well, that's what it's about. We want a really strong delivery of the rail network, and I think what was out in the Williams review, and then seeing that move forward, I think there's great options. And then how will that interface with what our city regions want? That needs to be worked out. But I'm more optimistic than I was probably 6 months ago that there is change happening, and I think we're all going to have time to shape what that's like. I mean, we've only just got it's a very short bill. The substantive GBR bill is going to come at some point. I've got no idea when it will land, but so I think I'm optimistic that we're actually going to start to think about what the outcome is for a network, and I think we all need to feed in what we believe that. What we think that should be. So I'm just pleased that we're actually moving forward.
Can I just ask a point about open access? I'm somewhat sceptical about open access because you either have a well-organised, pre-planned railway with timetables determined by GBR, or you have a free market. But I think open access is an attempt to kind of campaign by certain operators to take in a few kind of cherry pick a few routes and whatever, without a recognition of the importance of the whole. And I just wonder maybe Stephen, how you address that.
Well, I know you've stopped short of referring to them as parasites.
He will. Not try, it's quite simple.
That's what stop short of that. Well, look, yes, it's a first point to make on them, but I think they have demonstrated that there is a role for that free market element in the rail network, regardless of whether we have a publicly owned system or the current franchise system, but some form of franchising. Because just maybe sceptical, but the results speak for themselves in terms of open access. The reason that there are some efforts to expand the number of open access operators on other lines over the East Coast is because it does work. So I'd like to see that, I'm glad to see that they will have committed to the maintenance of open access provision, regardless of public ownership, and that centralised network that we hope to see as a result of it.
What do you think of that, Juice, since you represent
Yeah, I mean, we operate whole trades and Lumo, and I think what we can see is the customers are really happy with Lumo, and I think they probably pushed LNER as well to improve their service. So I think a bit of competition helped.
But not on the West Coast mainland where you run on.
Well, okay, I can see there is a trade-off between what you do as a network and how you optimize the network and for people within that. But I think Lumar has been a force for good. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're at the end of our time there. We've got some light refreshments, I believe. We have, and the air conditioning will be fixed in the break. Well, and just a final round of applause for our fantastic panel.
We're just waiting for a few people to come in. Okay, right. Welcome back, and for the second session, which is going to focus on freight, which is often the Cinderella of the railway industry. I get my ears bent by Maggie Simpson from Rail Freight when I write pieces that don't quite consider the freight aspects enough, and so on. So it's very good that the organisers of this conference have put freight to the forefront, as it were. Sorry, I'm Christian Wolmar. I write about railways, and probably most of you know who I am, but in case you don't, look up my website. So I'm going to start off initially with a general overview from Phil Smart, the Rail Freight Group, and then we're going to go on to the position from DB Cargo, of course, major freight provider, and then we're going to have a look at the position from the north. But Phil, if I could start off with you and give us your 5 minutes worth.
Okay, thank you very much. So, as you've heard, I'm Phil Smart, and mindful that I am sitting next to an eminent transport historian, I'll begin with a bit of history. I was just 4 weeks old when the then Conservative government appointed a guy called Ernest Marples as its transport minister in 1959, October. A controversial figure, as he owned a road construction business at the time. He in turn appointed Richard Beeching, who was responsible for reducing much of the rail network in the UK, although some of his legacy, such as train-load freight, remain a success today. But for many decades since then, the railway almost had to apologise for its very existence. Today, it all feels very different, doesn't it? We have a new Transport Secretary who is keen to move fast and fix things, to improve performance on the railways, to transform infrastructure and deliver greener transport as her top priorities. But perhaps more significantly, we have a new rail minister, Peter Hendy, who probably knows more about railways than many of the civil servants who are employed to advise him. Unlike the revolving door of the past, this is not someone who is on his way up or down the ministerial ladder. He won't be on his way to the Home or Northern Ireland office anytime soon. Expect him to stick around. So who are the Rail Freight Group? We are a trade body representing 130 businesses involved in the movement of freight by rail in the UK. Besides the obvious ones like DB Cargo, GB Rail Freight and Freightliner, our membership also includes ports such as Felixstowe, Southampton, London Gateway, the Port of Tilbury and many others around the country. We represent terminal and road haulage companies such as Maritime, Malcolm's and MSC. Aggregate and mineral mining businesses, all of whom are users of the railway, as well as the property companies who develop new rail terminals. So how do we fit in with the new government's agenda? So far we've heard a lot about growth, and among our arguments is the contribution rail freight makes to the UK economy. some 2.5 billion of economic benefit, most of it felt outside of London and the South East. We've heard a lot about the need to decarbonise our economy, and rail is better for the environment too. A unit load conveyed by rail produces barely a quarter of the CO2 that it would if conveyed by road, and this is with existing mainly diesel traction. It improves still further when we electrify more of the network and get almost to zero once we decarbonise the national grid. Greening our transport cannot be achieved without a programme of rail electrification. Rail freight is essential to the economy. Although only around 6% of passenger journey miles are made by rail, most of you used the railway even before you got dressed this morning. The slippers you put on and the kettle you boiled were probably imported via one of our major ports and conveyed by rail to a distribution centre. And up to 10% of the energy used to boil the kettle came from a power station fuelled by imported biomass pellets that were carried by rail. We've heard a lot about the need to get Britain building new homes, and rail conveys the aggregates used to build the homes we live and work in. They are used to build and occasionally repair the roads we drive over. The cars we drive and the parts to repair and maintain them are often moved by rail. So is the food we eat and the drinks we consume. Every home is a unit of production during its construction and a unit of consumption during its occupation. So what can we expect from the new government? Last December, the previous government announced a target to grow rail freight by 75% by 2050, when many were calling for a threefold increase. Indications from the new Transport Secretary suggests she would like to see a more stretching target, back with the statutory duty to promote rail freight. So watch this space. But without investment, this will be just another target for others to fail, as we face significant capacity challenges. The HS2 cancellation has left a capacity deficit on the West Coast Main Line, north of Handsacre. Capacity that could have been released for freight now requires a new solution to be found. The East Coast Main Line too was to benefit from the eastern leg, but its cancellation now puts further pressure on the timetable and the need for line upgrades. The principal Felixstowe to the Midlands and the North freight route still awaits funding for the vital junction at Ely. Public investment in our rail infrastructure has just not been keeping pace with private investment in new rail freight terminals. Our members are ready to play their part in getting more freight on rail, but this requires a willing partner in the state. In this new government, let's hope we've now found one.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. I'm going to put you slightly on the spot, because that's my job, really, and ask you, okay, you've knocked on the door of Lou Haig, and she's agreed to see you, and she says, okay, Phil, what's the one thing you want me to do quickly and urgently to get more freight on rail?
I've got a very, very annoying answer to that. Because, courtesy of the guy who's now the MP for Ipswich and a guy called Paul Simon at the Chamber of Commerce in Suffolk, we've actually had a meeting with Lou.
Oh, right, good.
And
this is not an annoying answer at all. This is
you haven't heard the rest of it yet. And this was a meeting to try and get her to commit to the junction at Ely.
Right.
And she heard what we've got to say.
Maybe
she
you
heard
could
from
tell
the
the audience about the junction.
Oh, right.
I know about the junction.
Yeah.
Really, but
So Ely Junction is in Cambridge, and the problem is that that's in the south, isn't it? But anyone in the north who wants stuff that's been imported via Felixstowe will benefit from the freeing up of capacity on this junction. There's a number of things that need doing. largely to do with closing of level crossings and finding a separate road solution in the area to increase capacity at that junction. There's also a single line section from Ely down to Soham. That was first put forward as a proposal to double in the LNER modernisation plan, history again, of 1947, which just demonstrates that as a nation we proudly lead the world in procrastination. But anyway, the meeting went very well, and she said, "This is great. I want Labour to commit to this before the next general election," and the election was called the following day.
You didn't tell me it was before the election. Right. Okay. And
well, we have to watch this space, don't we? But
okay.
I think that the appointment of Peter Hendy is perhaps the most significant thing. He's a guy that understands rail.
And he knows the importance of Ely Junction,
and he
which this audience does, but not a lot of people out there do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Catherine. Your chance of impressing Catherine,
Thank
as
you.
it says there, is from DB Cargo, and has a very important job. Tell me what your job title is.
Thank you. So my name is Catherine Aldale. I'm Head of Strategy, Policy and Communications at DB Cargo. So for those of you who don't know who DB Cargo are, we're one of the largest rail freight operators in the UK, not just in the UK, but internationally as well, across mainland Europe. Can I just circle back to that for a moment? Because is Ely one of the most important things? Yes, it is hugely important. Is it the most important thing now? And if Lou Hay walked through that door, what would I be saying to her? It would be close the cost gap between rail and road. Absolutely, fundamentally, that has to be the first thing our government addresses in terms of rail freight, and that's what we're here to talk about today. And I'm really, really glad to be here to talk to you today, and I say that in all sincerity, because 5 years ago, or in a pre-COVID state, would we have been here talking about passenger and freight together harmoniously? No, we certainly wouldn't be. You'd be here talking about passengers, which is great, but it's now the time that we need to recognise the importance and the significance of freight. And that's where our government, through a previous Conservative government and now a Labour government, have really pivoted to. And we wholeheartedly welcome that, and we welcome a duty to promote and protect freight under GBR, and especially a freight growth target. So previous one being set of 75% by 2050 is super. Is it ambitious enough? Categorically not, and we were calling for a trebling of freight growth by 2050. So 75% is somewhat there, but not where we need it to be. We also have a CP7 growth target set by Network Rail, which we are working towards, of 7.5% or 8% by CP8, which again we are fully supportive of and appreciative of. Again, not near as ambitious as we want it or need it to be. So we've got the right optics in place for freight. So we're talking about passenger and freight together at events and conferences. We have a growth target, both long term and short term. But are we near to getting there? No, we are categorically not, and we're not there. Because if you look at markets, so the markets that we traditionally operate in, so aggregate, people aren't building houses, people aren't buying houses because of the economic downturn. Cars, so we bring cars from mainland Europe, so from the Czech Republic all the way to Derby, all the way to Toten, and then manufactured vehicles back again. And people aren't buying vehicles, they're not manufacturing vehicles, so they're not moving either. People aren't buying the commodities that they used to buy in pre-COVID, so volumes aren't coming in, we're not importing, we're not exporting, so our volumes aren't there. You overlay the impact of interest rates and inflation onto that, and yes, both easing, but if you overlay that, there isn't the economic growth there to warrant the market uptick. So we are hoping that government stimulation, particularly in recent bills on planning, will start and see that, but we aren't feeling it yet. You then overlay the surplus of HGV drivers and HGVs in the market, causing unnaturally deflated HGV prices, so we can't compete on that either. And then the real whammy for me is the fact that road fuel duty hasn't been touched in over 10 years. We cannot compete in the logistics environment today where we are with the unnaturally low HGV charges. So we do not have a level playing field with rail and road. So what are we asking government for? Yes, it's Ely. It's not Ely first. It's to lower the cost gap and create a level playing field with road. That's our primary ask. Thank you.
Okay. But you were also suggesting that many of your markets are down from external factors. So if you're going to grow, where is that growth going to come from? I mean, let's assume that even there will be a bit of improvement in the terms of trade between rail freight and road freight, but that still probably leaves a rather gap. So where's your new stuff that you're going to carry?
So, how we're looking at it. So we will see market upturn, we will. So as the market starts to move, as the economy starts to move, people start buying houses, buying cars, manufacturing goods, importing and exporting goods, we will see that natural organic growth through existing customer bases and market bases. Where do I see growth? It's things like express freight, fast-moving freight. But also, how many of you have been on the road recently, sat on major arterial road networks, sat in congested traffic looking out at all the HGVs around you? Well, one train takes up to 129 of those HGVs off the road. Okay, so there are things being moved, commodity is being moved. What we're not very smart at today is aggregating that volume, and that's where we need to be smarter, more efficient and more effective as a sector. What's moving today? How do we bring it together, and how do we push it from road onto rail? And that's where we need government stimulus to help us.
And what's the most important stimulus? Just a price thing, or is that other
Cost.
stuff? Cost.
And whether
really
that is lowering the cost of rail and increasing cost of road,
or vice versa, or whatever,
doesn't matter. But that's where we need to move to.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure we'll come back to that in this session. Martin, over to you. Martin's going to give a perspective from Transport for the North.
Thank you, Christian. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If I've not met you before, I'm Martin Tugwell, Chief Executive of Transport for the North. In the context of this conversation, it's probably worth just reminding you that we have two roles as Transport for the North. One is we are a statutory body. We were set up under devolution from the government with powers and responsibilities from the department around advising and guiding strategic investment. But we also have skin in the game in that with the Rail North Agreement, we oversee delivery of both the TPE and Northern contracts. I think, Christian, I was going to reflect, I think there's a lot of energy at the moment in the rail sector generally, and that's really good, because if I think about what we're trying to achieve in the North, which we set out in our recently updated strategic transport plan, if we get it right, and if we make the investment right, we can unlock £118 billion extra per year in terms of GVA by unlocking the North's economic potential. That's in 2050. And transport has got to be at the heart of that. If we look at how we want to shift the use of transport, we need to see a tripling of the role of rail in the North in terms of people and freight, because that's key to actually delivering sustainable economic growth. You will not get that scale of growth without a lot more movement. What we've got to do is we've got to rebalance the transport system so that rail has a bigger role to play. So there's a lot of energy, and that's great, because we need to tap into that. An observation of mine from the last couple of weeks, or the first couple of weeks, is I think there's a challenge for us in the transport profession. I think we've been very used to, over the last few years, working in an approach which requires us to establish evidence, develop a policy, submit a strategy, make a case to government. And we've got to get our heads around it, that this is a government that wants to get things done. So it's about how do you make those ideas happen on the ground. And I think that's a challenge for the rail sector more generally, because if we look at our collective track record in terms of delivering projects to time, to budget, it's not particularly good. And as we run into a spending review, which we know is going to be difficult, that's not a particularly good place to start from. I think the other thing that just strikes me around rail reform, and it's relevant to thinking about how we deal with freight in the short term, is there's a risk that in focusing on the reform, which will be done at pace, which will require a lot of energy, there's a risk we take our eye off the ball in the here and now, which is where your markets are really important. If I think about, Phil's already mentioned the West Coast and the East Coast. I don't know, I'm sure you've clocked as well as I have. Post-general election, we have now got 3 notices on the West Coast Main Line, early warning of congested infrastructure. We've got a similar notice on the East Coast Main Line. And for those of us kind of trying to unpick and try to think about how we move forward with the timetable on the East Coast, the plain and simple fact is, the challenge we've got there is we've got more demand for the paths that are available, which is a good place to be if you're trying to make the case for investment, but I refer you to my earlier comment. If you're trying to make the case for additional investment, it would be better if we had a good track record to build upon. And the other thing I would just make an observation about in the here and now is, don't let us all forget that we know, don't we, that the CP7 settlement isn't about maintaining the status quo. It's actually about there will be a net reduction in the performance of the network. And across the north, we're increasingly now seeing resilience and reliability challenges because of earthwork failures or embankment failures. That's becoming a very real challenge in the here and now. So look, in terms of how we move this forward, there are three kind of things that strike me. First of all, is that recognition that freight is absolutely central to the challenge of unlocking that £118 billion. And of course, we're going to be celebrating 200 years of railways next year in Stockton and Darlington, although of course one might observe the freight railway was a little bit before that even. So let's not forget, actually freight has been at the centre of the economy for a long time. We need to think about how our markets are shifting. You'll probably, that's the sort of stuff that you as an operator do already. But we've got the first direct service coming into Liverpool shortly, carrying 10,000 TEUs direct from China. Not stopping in the south, coming direct in to the port of Liverpool. We have got some fantastic ports and gateways in the north, some of which have got good access, others which need better access. And if we think about how we make better use of the constraints we've got on infrastructure, getting services directly into the gateways, such as Liverpool, such as on the Humber, rather than bringing them into congestion in London and the South East, feels like a good idea. And there, for me, the second thing we need to do is we need to take advantage of the fact that just before we had the election, we had the new national national policy planning statement, which talked explicitly about identifying a strategic freight network. We need to use that to be able to identify what is the core strategic network that the operators can work around, that investors in distribution facilities and manufacturing facilities can work around. So you have that confidence in the private sector to invest in the infrastructure and to then be working with you as operators to be able to utilise it. Because as you say, Catherine, we know from an environmental perspective it makes absolute sense. Linking in with that, we kind of need to build on the work we've done as Transport for the North, working with the energy sector. We've done quite a bit of work with both National Grid and the DNOs about the scale of investment in energy that's needed to deliver electric vehicles. You think about electric capacity requirements for the rest of the infrastructure, and the scale is huge. So we've got to think, if we want a transport outcome, and we saw this in the manifesto from the new government, about joining up the planning of infrastructure across the modes, bringing together the National Infrastructure Commission and the Infrastructure Planning Authority to make that a reality. The third and final thing for me is about how we use the space that's available. Now, I think in the medium term, there's some there's some things to be confident and look forward to, because if we're in a state where we're no longer, the allocation of paths on the network is a commercial competition where people are competing. If it's about how, as a public sector, we work with industry to think about what's the best use of that path, whether it's a 750-metre intermodal train or a 2-car passenger unit, we can have a different and a more rational output, mission-driven conversation there. But that doesn't mean to say it's going to be easy in the short term, and that's where I think some of the lessons we're learning on the East Coast, where it is about how do you put that balance between passengers and freight. We need to use that experience in the short term to be able to give some boost to the opportunity for the freight operators, whilst we wait for the benefit of that change that comes through rail reform, where we'll be thinking about how do we use the past for a bigger set of outcomes. So I think there's a lot to be, lots of us challenging us in the short term, but I think the message about freight being central to delivering economic growth is one we need to latch onto, because that's right at the heart of the missions that power this government, and it gives us an opportunity. But boy, have we got to change our thinking and our approach, and we've really got to up our game on delivery and doing it to time, to budget, so that we can actually get the benefit of further investment.
Martin, that's good stuff. Let me just challenge you on one thing. You know, the passengers in your region, the north, often have a pretty miserable journey, and there's all sorts of problems with the operations of passenger trains, both TPE and Northern. How then do you think that you can fit in, given the infrastructure difficulties already, how can you fit in more freight trains into that?
So first of all, we need to deliver the investment that's already underway, of which are clearly we need to kind of focus on the fact that Trans-Pennine route upgrade, over £12 billion worth of investment, which is being delivered with gauge cleared and with paths notionally in the timetable for freight across the Pennines. We've just got to get on and do that.
Well, they are working on bits of it.
Well, we've got 6 years coming now over the next, we've got the next 6 years across the north. And this is where the arguments about new build versus modifying existing infrastructure. If I said to you, we've got 6 years where for half of the year, each of those 6 years, we will have some form of blockade on the Trans-Pennine route while we do that infrastructure. Now, the outcome is going to be great because it will be a really step change. You know, 12 billion will get you an awful lot. But the cost and the disruption in the interim is really significant. So we've got to make that happen and make it happen as effectively as we possibly can and keep people with us to go through that and deliver it. But I think we've also, as I said, Christian, got to learn our lessons from the East Coast, where we need to think about, we're talking with port operators, the distribution sector, to understand how the market is changing. I make the point about a 10,000 TEU ship coming into Liverpool. That's a game changer. That's a direct service from China. There will be others coming. There will be stuff coming in on short sea shipping from the European into the Humber and beyond. So we've got to work with the industry to understand where we can make some real quick wins, because there are opportunities, but we use the experience of things like the East Coast to understand how we get that balance between freight and passengers.
And are those containers arriving at Liverpool going to be transferred by rail?
There will be some that can go out by rail, but there's more that we need to do in terms of improving access.
Right. Okay, I'll throw it open. Well, I'll start over here, because, you know, Anthony, and then yes.
Have you got mics?
No, just boo.
Here down the other end.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Excellent. Anthony Smith from Independent Rail Retailers. Most evenings, I think, a very long container train goes through platforms 13 and 14 at Piccadilly and then crosses every single track to get to the slow lines on the west coast, effectively blocking.
It's allowed the train spotters to take all the numbers.
But how are you as freight operators going to avoid the new directing mind of Great British Railways? Just thinking you're a bit in the way, you're a bit troublesome, and just move you along?
Okay, we'll take a couple more questions.
Yeah. My question's aimed probably...
Sorry, you are?
Oh, Elaine Green from Stadler. The decision by the Post Office to stop Royal Mail, to stop using freight, I beg your belief really, but I'm sure what Catherine said is probably behind that decision, fundamentally. I mean, is it time for the government to step in and say this is a bad example to set, but also, I mean, I have no concept of how much they currently use the rails, and so how much of an impact is it actually going to have?
Question? One more.
Just to build on Anthony's point, shadow GBR is going to be set up. How do we stop it putting passengers first?
Right, anybody want to start with this, Phil?
I think we started with the point about the difficulty of pathing stuff across Manchester into Trafford Park. Trafford Park itself feels the same pain because it's only allowed one path per hour in and one path an hour out. Various people, including myself, have looked at alternatives, and I know that there are plans afoot to spread the load a bit with other freight terminals in the northwest. And the northwest is rather short of rail freight terminals, so we do need to develop that agenda. I haven't seen yet the plans to address the capacity between Crewe and Manchester, but if we can manage to get some of the long distance passenger services on a parallel route, or upgrade the route to allow both, then hopefully the freight won't be such a problem. But it's just one of geography, which is how do you get the stuff off the Stile line across into Trafford Park. Trafford Park is where it is, the Stile line is where it is, and that's a challenge. But I'm sure Martin's got his own thoughts on Manchester.
Go on, Martin. You've got a while in Manchester. Take that, and then I'll.
So there's two issues here. One is about how do we manage the current situation, and about what is the longer term solution. And I think in terms of managing the current situation, the northern authorities through the Manchester Recovery Task Force, we kind of got ourselves into a situation now where performance through Manchester is a lot more reliable and a lot more resilient. And indeed, that came at some pain, because the North was actually kind of having to say, we will give up some of the paths that actually happened to go through there. And as a slight aside, don't get me wrong, I recognise the benefits that open access operators can bring, but it is a little bit galling when the operators that are already there have taken a decision to step back, provide space to give resilience and reliability to the network, and then through a separate process, what appears to be white space on the graph timetable gets filled up by open access. Now, my hope with the rail reform is we start getting something closer to the Scottish model, where there's one set of objectives that we're trying to achieve with the rail network, and we're working to get that to total. I think in the longer term, it's about how do we stop, or how do we make sure that freight has the right priority. That's where I do come back in. We've got the hooks in from my perspective. The National Network, NPS, talks about a strategic freight network. We want to, as part of the implementation of the strategic transport plan, map out what that will be for the North, so that you've got a baseline that you can say, on these corridors, freight needs to have this kind of priority, and you start with them as their role on that corridor, rather than what's the space left, because you're doing it from an economic and an outcome perspective. The mission that is about economic growth. So we've got the hook there, we just need to use that quickly to get it into the system, and then once rail reform comes through, we get away from this competitive process where there's a finite amount of capacity, the market bids for it, we can think about how best to allocate it. There is one thing that can help us in that, and that's understanding the value of freight on rail to the economy. So what we've set ourselves doing this year in the North is to develop what we're calling a Northern Playbook, which is to take the framework in the Green Book and actually use some of the flexibility that already exists there. It's very easy for people to say, we need to change the Green Book. Actually, we just need to use the flexibility that's in the Green Book already. That's what we're trying to do.
Okay, Catherine.
Okay, it's quite a lot of big questions there, so a couple of minutes on it. So can I just touch on passenger versus freight? And on one hand, I mentioned it earlier, really great status. We have a growth target, 75% 2050, 7.5% by CP8. On the other hand, we have a horrendous situation with the East Coast Main Line timetabling, where we're left with not even white space. Okay, there's nothing left for freight in the timetabling exercise, and we cannot be in that position again, ever. So we have a really hard job to do as a freight industry and as colleagues and stakeholders and as a network to really champion the importance economically and environmentally of rail freight to the network. £2.5 billion to the UK economy every single year. One train's 129 trucks off the road. We all sit on congested roads looking at all these trucks going up and down. They have to come off the road, they have to go onto rail. Royal Mail, dreadful decision, absolutely dreadful. Took us totally by surprise. It is something that we are deeply disappointed by, and in terms of real-term impact, it is 10,000 HGVs additionally on the road every single year because of their modal shift from rail to road.
Yeah, but the argument was it was greener and there's not much mail being...
But I'd like to see where... So running trucks isn't necessarily greener, running them with HVO certainly isn't greener if you're looking at their supply chain. You also need to factor in the air freight that's then going onto the road as well. And I don't have those calculations, I don't work in air. But yeah, 10,000 from rail to road.
Okay, and that's it. Okay, all right. Questions? Right. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, Martin Glover from Free Squared. We've heard a lot about different areas and around specific solutions to things. If you look back to the Williams report, guiding mind, systems thinking, very key in that. So bearing in mind we'll have this shadow body with the statutory duty for freight sitting behind GBR, what do you think it can do to make it easier for potential customers who've not used rail freight before to get into the freight market and get new customers using rail freight?
Okay, other questions at the moment? No? Okay. Phil, you can start with that one.
Yeah, there's a good deal of work being done, I think by people like yourselves, in trying to demystify how you get into rail. And there is this belief that unless I've got 700 metres worth of containers, then rail's not interested. But actually that's not the case, because there is software being developed that can sell spare space on trains, and I think that's important. The Labour Party document that was issued in April did touch on this, trying to demystify and make it easier for people to use rail freight. So I think that, in combination with this statutory duty to promote, I mean, the signs are hopeful, but we always live in hope, don't we? But these are at least hooks that we can hang the government on to say, you said this, how's it working? So, yeah, I think that's probably the best I can do for now in terms of an answer.
Catherine, you already...
I'll come back at this. So, a couple of points on this. So, in terms of making it easier, I'm not entirely sure easier is the right way. I think it needs to be more accessible. And cost has to be one driving factor. How do we bring the cost of using rail down? How do you do that? I've talked extensively about that. I think access, timetabling, and when we run, so looking at fulfilling customer needs maybe on just in time, or looking at the kind of commodities, if it's fresh produce, you know, they have a different regularity and different access and timetabling need, and we need to look at that reflecting customer requirements. But I think the bigger question here is about the use of technology, and what is the space in the rail freight sector for what I call a technological revolution. And I don't think we're talking about evolution anymore. I think it's wholesale revolution that our sector needs when it comes to technology, and it's basic things like how do we access the network, what's on our trains, where are our trains at any given time, how can our customers see that, and things like vegetation. I could talk at length about vegetation on the network and the impact to us and to our customers and the financial impact then onward users. But I think there's a huge space available for technology in rail freight.
And I think there's one further thing that I mentioned to do with traction. Freight trains have been limited to 75 miles an hour top speed for a long time. And there is a team within GBR that's looking at, actually, is that still appropriate? And actually some of the results can be quite surprising. I have seen some research work done to say, well, if you bump it up by another 10 or 12 miles an hour in top speed, what does that look like on the planning graph? Does the train have to keep stopping in loops to allow a fast train behind it to overtake? Or can it stop further up the line in another loop? Or not have to stop at all? And some of the work has proved that you can save anything up to 2 or 3 hours end-to-end journey time. That is the difference between getting it done in a single shift or not. And if you can get that train from A to B and back to A in a day, you saved a train, and that strips out cost, which I think plays into your point. If you can make freight operate more efficiently on the network, the cost to the end user will come down.
Okay. Martin, you got anything to add? No.
The only thing I would say, we don't need to wait for a shadow GBR or anything. If we know it's the right thing to do, we need to do it. Yep. And I think that's the thing that I would say I take from the new government in the first 2 weeks is when the Secretary of State's talking about getting things done and fixing it, It's a message to people, you are empowered to make things happen. So we need to grab that, because that's an open opportunity to address some of our frustration we've had for too long.
Mark.
Something Catherine, I think, touched upon, but I think everybody will have a view about this. You talked, I think, about planning consents in relation to intermodal depots, and the NIMBYs come into play there, just as they do with housing or electricity grid or whatever. And we've got a planning bill coming to address this. So are there any specific reforms you'd like to see in relation to rail freight and intermodal that could improve the position there?
Yes.
Okay. Hold on, I've got one more question.
Thank you. Just wondering, how much of rail freight is electrified at the moment, and is the cost of electricity one of these problems that we're facing in terms of competition with road freight?
Right, yes, that's a good question. There was some freight that came off rail because of that. Catherine, start off with Mark's question.
Right, okay, so planning and reform. For me, there's two parts to this. One is about new sites and the ease of planning applications, and it's not just about ease of planning applications and the speed at which they go through. It's also about making sure that when they're rail connected, that is utilised. So how many interchanges do we have in the intermodal interchanges do we have where rail was fundamental to having the planning agreed, but actually none of the rail infrastructure is utilised for rail. It's just lovely track, lovely expensive track that's there. So we need to speed up the process and make sure that the rail users that are part of the planning application are actually using those interchanges. But I think the other side to it is looking longer term, looking at the infrastructure that we have today. How do we use it better? And how do we protect it as well? How do we make sure that all the sites that are rail connected and either being used or non-used, how do we make sure that they stay rail connected in the future? And I think that there's a concern across industry that we may start to lose some of that. So we need to speed up planning and utilisation, but then also protect what we have as well.
Cost of electricity?
I think this is going to affect nationwide. I mean, let's just look at what the graph's going to look like. Electricity demand is going to go up. Rail isn't the only thing we're trying to decarbonise. We're trying to charge electric vehicles and persuade everyone to have one. We want all the industrial processes, manufacturing, to be electric. And so the upward curve is enormous. At the same time, we are trying to wean the nation off gas production. We've already weaned ourselves off coal. We want to get off gas production, and we've also got to replace ageing nuclear plants. So there's going to be a huge energy gap, and that's the biggest challenge for the government, is to close that energy gap, because the laws of supply and demand will ensure that the price of electricity goes up for everybody, which is not good for the cost of living. I think there was the point about when the price of electricity for what we call EC for T, electric charge for traction, went up. And what tends to happen, and this is something else we might need to look at, what tends to happen is that a freight operating company running electric locomotives will strike a deal in the first year that is good for however long the contract is. They will hedge at that price. And if the national price of electricity jumps up, then it suddenly becomes a spike. It's not a gradual move, so it's a shock to the system. And then people say, oh, we can't do this anymore, let's run diesels. And that's something that I think we've really got to look at. What are the component costs of the electricity, and why is it taken in the round? As Catherine says, why don't we try and level the playing field? Because we know that electric charging for lorries is no cheap breeze either. It's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out.
But are you expecting government to do something about that? I mean, can government regulate electricity prices to trains?
Can I just just come back to the point I made earlier about the challenge to us as a profession, okay? We have got so used to saying, we need a study, we need a strategy, we need a plan. Well, the last time I looked, the National Infrastructure Commission published their National Infrastructure Assessment last year, only last year. It was produced by some of the best that are around. It was produced within a budget envelope provided by the Treasury as to how much money available from the public sector. But more importantly, it set out the role of the private sector to work side the public sector to deliver. They looked at road, rail, they looked at energy, they looked at a whole range of other pieces of infrastructure. The mantra of this government is get on and deliver. We have a national infrastructure assessment. We know what we need in terms of additional capacity and generation and distribution. What about just getting on and delivering the plan that we've just prepared? Because that would be a bit novel, wouldn't it, rather than another strategy? We get so fixated on having another plan rather than delivering a really good assessment, which, as I said, is underpinned by a financial envelope provided by the Treasury. So that's a pretty good starting point for a plan to deliver.
Well, I think that's a very good point to actually end on, as it's now 12 o'clock and lunch is available. Thank you very much.
Thank you to everybody that's contributed this morning. Thank you, Christian, and our panellists. Please, if you possibly can, do stay for this afternoon, because we've got a really interesting session after lunch on innovation and sustainability, which is going to cover all sorts of things like finance, private sector infrastructure, digital ticketing, and energy consumption. So look forward to seeing you after lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Waiting for two colleagues I can definitely see aren't in the room. One more minute and then crack on. Right, I'm too impatient, let's crack on.
Yes, yeah. Shut.
I think it keeps vaguely the aircon. Yeah. Right, so first of all, wanted to award a large amount of brownie points to you all for sticking around for the post-lunch session, so thank you. I'm determined to not let your full stomachs turn into a yawnathon in these last sessions. So you'll be pleased to know that I've asked our speakers to entertain you and keep you awake by making their remarks through the medium of song. I joke. Unless, you don't want that. This is the innovation category, you know. So yeah. But so our discussion this afternoon is looking at innovation and sustainability, as you can see. But of course, as we all know, even though this is a bespoke session where we've siphoned it off, they obviously both form a crucial part of the previous sessions of delivering in terms of for passenger rail and for rail freight. But they're so important, we still wanted to put a session of their own. So for those of us who have worked in transport for a long time, I think we've all had to continually grapple with what the strategic mission of the government is at the time, or the Chancellor is at the time. So we've been constantly coping with the revolving door of, is our strategic hook of our scheme, of our project, is it about the environment, or is it about economic growth? Then is it back to the environment, back to economic growth, the decarbonisation? And I think that's been really difficult in terms of forming coherent, strong business cases, actually, and when we're trying to win funding for different pots from the government. So I think it was really nice to hear this morning from Catherine Atkinson, where she basically kind of confirmed that, you know, both can exist at the same time. We can focus on strategic outputs, we can try and deliver on economic growth and decarbonisation at the same time. And dare I say it, it sounded like a hint of stability. You know, don't say too loud, but around that. But I think that's actually really important, because the amount of work that goes into business case formulation and funding, you know, funding applications is huge, you know, in both public and private sector. So I think that was really welcome, actually. And on that note, I think actually I'll introduce the first of our panellists, Mark Livock, who's CEO of Heathrow Southern Railway, whose scheme, I can heartily say, seeks to meet both economic growth, you know, tick the boxes of economic growth and decarbonisation. So, tell you a little bit about Mark. So he's currently CEO of Heathrow Southern Railway, which, for those of you who don't know, is an independent venture set up to design, build and operate a new rail link, providing rail access to Heathrow for those living in Surrey, Hampshire, south and southwest of London. Mark has got a long and distinguished career in the UK civil service, including as DfT's principal programme client for the Trans-Pennine Upgrade and Crossrail, and as franchise manager for DfT and the Strategic Rail Authority. That gives away your age a bit there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But, sorry,
back in the day. Back in the day. I still remember working for John Prescott, so there we go. There we go. Well, thank you, Katie. Is that your bit?
Well,
you've probably said about 50% of what I was going to say, so no, thank you for that. And to answer your first question, I think the music would be Dareem. Things can only get better. So, but no, thank you, Katie, and good afternoon, everybody. For those that you don't know me, and I haven't had a chance to meet everybody, I've been the Chief Executive of Heathrow Southern Railway since last October. So still kind of finding my feet, but very excited to be on board this project. But I'm also an associate at Cogitamus. So I've been working with Mark and Katie and other colleagues for almost 5 years now. So amazing how time flies when you're having fun. So for those of you who don't know much about our project, first of all, you will notice there's a postcard that's been strategically placed around the room. That actually has links to our website and more details. So now, of course, everybody reads that and doesn't listen to what I'm saying. But won't take you long to read it. But it's a summary. And if you want more information about the project, it's there. But essentially, what we are looking to do, what we're proposing to do, is build a new electrified railway line, much of it in tunnel, southwards from the existing Heathrow Terminal 5 station box. And that will go south and join the existing Network Rail infrastructure at two locations. One on the line that runs from Windsor down to Waterloo in the Staines area. And the second is continuing the tunnelling down towards Virginia Water, where we can join the South West Railway line that has a link via Wokingham to Reading, but then onwards to West Byfleet and the South Western Main Line. So this fills a really major gap in the existing rail network, particularly for Heathrow, but also for the wider rail network, because getting from the southwest onto the western and parts of West London has always proved to be a challenge. But we are looking to open up a new range of travel opportunities. And of course our market is both airline passengers, and I think everybody's been reading that Heathrow continues to bust its numbers of passengers. I think it's over 80 million passengers a year now using the airport, and that seems to be growing to the extent that the airport now is being challenged in terms of capacity. But equally importantly, there are 50,000 people that work on the airport estate. So that in itself is like having a small town that requires to go to and from every day, because I don't think many people sleep on the job, so to speak, at Heathrow, although you may argue that sometimes looks like it. So we've got 50,000 people that need to get to and from the estate every day. So if we were to build, or when we build our infrastructure, the sort of train services that could operate, and I think it's important to distinguish from the fact that at the moment we are proposing to build the infrastructure, we are not proposing to be the train operator. But providing the infrastructure could allow, for example, the extension of the Elizabeth line from Terminal 5 through to Staines. Equally, we are looking to provide a through service extending the London Waterloo service, which calls, of course, at Clapham Junction. And for those that know the geography of that part of London, Richmond, Twickenham, all very important generators of traffic for the airport, both passengers and staff, into Terminal 5. And then probably the most interesting element could, of course, be longer distance services that could access locations like Woking, Basingstoke, Guildford, into the airport, but also, importantly, many of those trains can carry on towards central London on the existing railway. So you could provide connectivity from, let's say, Woking or Basingstoke to Old Oak Common. And of course, as we know, Old Oak Common will be served by HS2, so it creates a new degree of connectivity there. But of course, it will then go on into central London via Paddington and the West End. So, for example, if you live in Staines and want to go to, let's say, Canary Wharf, it may be quicker and certainly far more convenient to get on a train at Staines and get off at Canary Wharf station, rather than getting the existing service into Waterloo and then fight your way through the Waterloo congestion to then go on the underground or whatever for your onward journey. So it's more than just an airport link. It is actually potentially a part of the strategic rail network. So you might be asking why we're sitting in this particular session, innovation and sustainability. And I think there are probably two elements to that. The first is that our proposal is innovative insofar as it is a private sector-led initiative. The genesis came from the previous government's challenge to deliver new railway infrastructure without direct government funding. That initiative, in the end, didn't actually result in much coming out of the other end, but it got our scheme off the ground, and for that we're grateful. And up to 2 weeks ago, the government's stance was still there is no public funding available for this particular scheme. It may be because of geography, because we're down south, and obviously there's been a lot of focus on investment in the north. Quite rightly so, of course, Martin, and one wouldn't want to denigrate any schemes in the north. But I'll come on to what we think the change may be with the new government in a minute. The second element is, of course, our scheme is sustainable as well. We believe our electric train service will deliver a significant modal shift away from both car. We estimate potentially up to 3 million journeys a year in and around the M25 Heathrow area. Plus, of course, bus travel, because a lot of folk do get the bus at the moment into the airport. And of course, that reduces emissions and improves air quality. So the model that we're developing sees the majority of capital being raised through the private sector, as I say. Heathrow Southern Railway Limited is a privately owned company. We have been supported by investment through ACOM, who have been providing engineering support on our design. And at the moment, where are we with the project? Well, we're currently refreshing the business case, and we're working very closely now with Heathrow Airport Limited to understand how this fits in to their strategic plans. I think most people know that there's a new chief executive that's been in place for about 6 months now, Thomas Wolby. He comes from, his previous job was at Copenhagen Airport in Denmark, which had a very, very strong green agenda at the airport, and he was very successful in developing the airport along those lines. So we believe that we are part of potentially his suite of options to help improve and develop the airport over the next 10 years or so. So what we hope is that we can actually move into detailed design within the next 6 months or so, or, to quote the new government, making things happen. So we are very keen to get to the next level of development and really understand what the engineering solutions are for this particular project. So finally, just sort of commenting on the new Labour government and some of the announcements they've already made about the rail sector. I think we do welcome the coordinated approach. Certainly, there are things that the new government could do to help us, short of providing a cheque. If they want to provide a cheque, fantastic, we'd certainly welcome that. But if not, there are things that they could do, for example, about train service specification that could be helpful. And if we're going to get a more coordinated and integrated timetabling pattern, we think that will help us, because clearly there is demand to go to the airport and we want to be able to help and supply that. And we're also obviously very keen to work with them to understand in more detail their proposals about supporting economic growth and how private sector investment, coupled with perhaps some government support, could actually deliver infrastructure schemes going forward. And this will be quite a large project. Okay, it's not on the same scale as Crossrail or HS2, but even so, it will generate jobs within that particular part of London. And of course, the overall benefit of improved connectivity will make locations like Staines more attractive for inward investment. And as we've seen from Crossrail, if you look at somewhere like Abbey Wood, I understand from TfL that there has been a 30% growth in rail passenger traffic from Abbey Wood because of the Elizabeth line. And if you look around all of the Crossrail stations, or the Elizabeth line stations, I keep on using the old name, there has been a lot of development of retail, of catering, hotels, because it has the connectivity. And of course, people want to get to the airport quickly. So we think that it will have quite a beneficial impact upon the local economy of some of these locations in the southwest. So as I say, we think that Heathrow Southern Railway fits well with Labour's new strategy, and we'll certainly be looking to knock on doors and have the chat with Lou Haig and her colleagues. And obviously Peter Hendy hopefully understands the benefit of investment of rail in the London area. So, as I say, if you'd like any more information about the project, you've got our contact details on the postcard, or just nobble me before the end of today. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I'm going to actually take questions for Mark now, if that's all right, Mark, just
Please,
because it's such a specific
Okay.
project. I think you can join in as well later, obviously, but I just wondered if anyone had anything specific to ask about the funding model or anything about the new railway. Otherwise, we can just get up into the next session.
Am I allowed to ask a question?
You certainly are. Yeah.
When's it going to happen, Mark?
Well, that's a good question. We are starting to work up our plans. Obviously, a lot will depend upon getting the initial support for further development work. But if things go well, we think that we could be getting towards planning applications in 2.5 years' time. Allowing 18 months for that process. We'll be going out to the market for contracting. So I think we've been saying that with a fair wind, it could be the early 2030s. So 6-7 years is probably the reality of it, because we've got to get the funding package in, we've got to get private sector involvement, we've got to go through all the planning issues. So if we can beat it, we'll try to. But I think being realistic, I think 6 years is about what I would be looking to put on the initial programme.
Thanks, Mark. Christian, did you have any?
Well, I was going to say, how much? I mean, how much is it all private money, or is there a requirement of some public money?
Well, we would welcome some public investment, because we think there are benefits to the wider community. But we are working on the basis that we can't guarantee that. So, our model is based upon raising it purely from the private sector, which is tough. We've got to have advocacy, if you like, for the scheme. But there are things, for example, that if, let's say, the Elizabeth line did go down to Staines, we would anticipate they would have to fund the costs of additional rolling stock, staff, possibly also some of the platform works at Staines. That's areas for negotiation, if you like. But of course, Mayor Khan will claim he's got no money either, so that could be quite an interesting conversation as well.
Interesting stuff. Anyone else before we move on?
Yeah, just on the topic of planning, because obviously it's another hot topic at the moment. What do Labour's new planning reforms mean for your project, and does it potentially help you speed up the process in terms of the timeline for delivering the railway?
Well, again, I don't think I know the exact specific answer to that question, but the mood music sounds very positive. If it does help speed up the programme, then that 6 years can come down in terms of actually delivering the benefits. Obviously there's always the challenge of being one of the first in the queue to sort of be brave and pioneer this new technique, but we'll be looking to embrace every opportunity. On the other hand, though, I would say, and almost for the public record, that clearly we are committed to working with the local authorities in the area. We know, for example, we are skirting a special site of scientific interest, so we can't ride roughshod over local sensitivities, and we have to be a good neighbour in whatever we do going forward.
Brilliant, thanks. No, really interesting scheme, thank you. So panel, we heard this morning that we are definitely on that path towards kind of centralised structure for the rail industry with the guide in mind. And there's an awful lot of benefits that will accrue from that. But I'd like to also hear your thoughts on your views on whether that will impact the level of innovation in the industry at all, for good or not, essentially. I'm particularly looking at the moment at Anthony and Peter, but perhaps Anthony, you'd like to kick off some remarks of your own. I mean, most of you, I'm assuming most of you in the room know who the inimitable Anthony Smith is. Spent a long career in transport focus and its many guises, 25 years or so under its various guises.
I know. It's like North Korea.
And Anthony is wearing many hats still, which include the Heathrow Transport Forum,
yes,
and Director of Consultancy Consumer Focus. But your specific hat today is as the Independent Retailers.
Yeah. Shall I do my words?
So do your
Thank
words.
You. I'm going to stand up because these chairs are chronically uncomfortable. I don't know who designed, some bloke designed those, obviously. Absolutely terrible. Now this room's a very odd shape. You have to sort of speak in two directions at once. So just wave.
Full neck mobility, don't you?
If I'm not projecting. Elaine, am I projecting enough?
You are indeed.
Yeah. Tom, am I projecting enough?
Pardon?
Yes. Oh, God.
Always one. Yeah.
Right. My name's Anthony Smith. Among other things, I'm the chair of the Independent Rail Retailers. That's the trade association for all the main non-train company sellers of rail tickets in Great Britain. You've heard of Trainline. We also have other members, Virgin Trains Ticketing, and Trip.com is one of our members, which is the Chinese retailer of train tickets. They retail all the train tickets in China. That's not a bad market, is it? Funny enough, there's no competition. Funny enough, and it's state-owned. But anyway, we've got an interesting, diverse set of members. They do three things basically. They sell train tickets direct to consumers, Trainline, My Train Tickets, ticketing, etc. They do lots of so-called white labelling to industry partners such as Avanti. Our members supply your stuff? Yes. So most of apart from LNER, virtually all of the train company websites are powered by our members, and also the members do lots of business-to-business stuff, helping organisations manage their travel budgets. In terms of the current rail market, revenue is about, 9.6 billion, something like that in the railways. About £5 billion worth of that goes through our members one way or another, either through direct sales or through white labelling of top websites. About 90% of online sales are now made by our members and others, and for every pound that's generated by our members, 95p goes straight back to the industry, to the government, which is a pretty good cost of sale, actually, if you know what DFL and selling from from ticket offices costs. Very good partnership with organisations like Avanti and others in terms of a kind of mixed economy of Avanti selling some tickets direct to consumers, and then being, I think broadly being very happy with their sort of vibrant third-party rail market, which has a reach abroad in other places. I think what's interesting about our members, they sit upon a huge pile of data, vast amount of data about passenger habits, rebuying, when they buy, when they book. Innovative, brought in split ticketing, paid for all of the barcode rollout across the rail network. That was all done by private sector money. And they attract very good people. And of course, they're international. They're working in lots and lots of different countries. So it's a very interesting, vibrant sector to work in. I think the starting point for all these discussions has got to be is what a passenger needs. And they're remarkably consistent over the years. Above all else, people want trains that are reliable. You know, it's a good start. We were talking earlier about Count Binface, his manifesto for the election, which if you saw it was excellent, because number 4 in his manifesto was Wi-Fi that works on trains, and number 5 was trains that work. And I thought that's a pretty good manifesto, actually. I could vote for that. I didn't, but I could have voted for that one. That's quite good. But passenger needs are pretty basic. Just make the flipping trains turn up on time, and lots of people will come and use them. Beyond that, of course, people want value for money tickets, and that's become an increasingly important concern. And beyond that, ease of purchase, and then good quality information before, during, and after the journey. And it's interesting to note, and Richard, I'll be interested in your comments on this, passenger behaviour has utterly changed post-COVID. People are now trading down. They're trading out of first class into premiums, premium standard, or whatever. They're trading into standard, advanced tickets. People are trading away from open tickets because they're too expensive and they've got very pricey. They're trading into advanced. And then they're trading down in terms of trains, so they're travelling at odder times. So people are very, very price conscious, and that is the market that Great British Railways has got to deal with and has got to stimulate. I think Great British Railways, there's a big debate coming up about how on earth they are going to retail tickets themselves, and if they are, how are they going to do it? I think our members would very much like that to be on very equal competitive terms. There's a very interesting, vibrant debate about the moment about state-backed retailing as opposed to private sector retailing and the fairness of that in commercial terms. But I think the big opportunity in all of this is to update the industry's chronically out-of-date booking systems. We have an absolutely antediluvian booking system where you have to ask a question about, I want to go to Edinburgh at 12 o'clock next Sunday. You can't do anything else. The system's really crude. You can't type in, how can I get to Edinburgh for 10 quid? Or anything that, you know, if Google was inventing this, they would not invent the system we've got. Some train companies do it quite well. Eurostar do it quite well. And I got an email yesterday from Trip.com saying, why don't you go to Paris for 35 quid? You know, there's this train, and it was about 10 o'clock at night or something. And I thought, you know, it's just after the Olympics. But that's the sort of marketing that Great British Railways and the private sector have got to really, really embrace after we've got this new system set up. It'd be really useful if our members could retail all of the products in the industry, and I know Richard will have a view about that, but it'd be nice if we could get hold of all of the products that the train companies have, because why would you not want to get your products in front of a much bigger audience? Seems a bit odd. You know, put it in a supermarket rather than a corner shop. Seems a bit strange. Anyway, and then there's a whole discussion about the commercial terms in the industry as well. But I think as we move forward, next year is a really important year, the 200th anniversary of the railways. It's a fantastic event. You know, Britain invented the railways. And I think the interest and the energy that will generate will be tremendous. And I think what our members want to do is to help drive that growth, keep costs under control, because they're perfectly incentivised to control costs, because they make more money that way, and they make more money if they sell more tickets, improve the passenger experience, and all done with private sector money. So go and have a look at our website and vote for that. Thank you.
You missed your vacation there. The election was...
No, I missed it. There's another one coming.
I hope not.
Peter, I don't know if... bit topsy-turvy, but I don't know if you wanted to kind of make any...
Yeah, a bit less well known than this gentleman, I think, so, yeah.
In terms of, you know, prospects, your thoughts around impacts on innovation before
Absolutely.
your kind of a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
You know,
So, Peter Kingsland, I head up Icamira in the UK. You may not know the name, but most of you, I hope, will have used on-train Wi-Fi, so you've probably used our service for good or other at some point over the last 20 years it is now. So we as a company are 25 years old this year. Back in 1999, the cutting-edge device that was launched was the RIM BlackBerry, one of those lovely little email devices that only did email, didn't do any of the things these things do. So in that 25 years, which in rail I know is not very long, a lot has changed. And these Swiss Army knives, digital Swiss Army knives, as I call them, have become the centre of our lives. And they all rely on connectivity. So, yes, it's about passenger Wi-Fi. It's about improving the passenger experience. Post-COVID, we've seen passenger Wi-Fi, as you would expect, recover in line, mostly in line with passenger numbers in the UK. But what we've also seen is even though the UK was ahead of most other countries in deploying passenger Wi-Fi, GNR being the first innovator back in the day in 2004, what's happened is we're being overtaken at the moment by Germany, by Deutsche Bahn, by Trenitalia. And the reason for that is they've invested very heavily in their telecoms infrastructure as well as their onboard infrastructure. So 20 to 30% of passengers use on-train Wi-Fi in the UK today. In those countries, it's more like 40 to 50% and higher. And what we all want is that it becomes a default behaviour. You don't think about it. You get on, you log on, it works. Like with everything on the train, the ticketing, the toilets. I mean, one eye-opening moment for me last year, which showed where we've come from. You know, we've come from this GNR innovating with passenger Wi-Fi to a train operator saying to me, "You're now on the same level as toilets." Okay, which in a way is a reverse compliment because it means we are part of the CSAT schools, we're part of the service quality. Therefore, it has to work every time. Otherwise, we all look bad. But again, like everything in rail, it's a joined-up piece. You know, it is track and train. It is the infrastructure, and one of the challenges is the infrastructure is not rail infrastructure; it's mobile infrastructure. But they need to get that track side, and as we all know, there have been challenges with that in the past. There is innovation happening. You know, some train operators are experimenting with Starlink. We've got millimetre wave with EvoRail on South West Rail at the moment. We've got 5G coming. The problem is this is all quite fragmented at the moment. And one thing I think we would like as iChimera is ideally to have a digital guiding mind somewhere in the guiding mind that could try and bring some coherence to this. And I do think, Katie, that's one of the big prizes we could see here. The franchise cycle used to be great for us because it was effectively our business plan, because every new franchise, one of the services they looked at was Wi-Fi and digital, and that competition was great. That's what drove the market. And I'm hoping we're not going to lose that, but actually we're going to get more coherence. The other real eye-opener, which I guess the DFT's review of Wi-Fi last year triggered in a way, it made everybody look at, well, why are we offering on-train Wi-Fi? What are we doing with it? And what became clear was, yes, passengers want it. Of course they do. You know, there are more Teams meetings going on post-COVID. On the way to work, on the way home, you're on Netflix. If you have an accessibility issue, these things can really help with people with sight issues and with hearing issues, and actually give that confidence to travel by train. So there's so many ways, as I say, these Swiss Army knives can be used. Lost my train of thought there, no pun intended. We'll keep going. But what we've got to recognise is fast forwarding to 2030, so not very far. You know, just on the horizon. In fact, the time frame it takes to get a new train into market, pretty much 6 years. What Deutsche Bahn are predicting, what HS2 has predicted, is we're going to need 3.5 gigabits per second to the top of the train. At the moment, we're getting less, on a very, very good day, probably half a gig. And that's when everything is aligned, the infrastructure, the on-train system, everything. So 3.5 times the speed, 3.5 times the data going through is the prediction from Ericsson and others. So we need to plan for that, I guess, as a collective, as an industry. Otherwise, we're going to fall further behind. I remember my point now. The other big thing that came out of that DFT review was the TOCs. It showed that they were using the onboard connectivity. So stop talking about passenger Wi-Fi. Start looking at it as just internet connectivity. In some cases, 50% of the data they're using for passenger Wi-Fi is actually for other things. It's actually for getting all this data, and obviously data is the buzzword. Passenger count, remote condition monitoring, video surveillance, you name it. All of that data is now being pulled over this infrastructure, which is no longer nice to have passenger Wi-Fi. It's critical, in my view. It's as critical as the tracks. You know, it's what the platform for innovation in future. A platform for getting all this data, applying AI, machine learning. There's all sorts of benefits which, you know, Catherine, it's not just passenger either, it's also freight. There are a lot of benefits that technology can bring, but it's having that strategy and vision, and then the plan, the short-term plan that feeds into the vision, I think, that we're missing at the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think, you joke about the analogy of the toilets, but that level, that kind of being on par with that is crucial, because part of the problem with, technological interventions and advances is it's always, anything to do with technology, always badged as innovative. And the trouble is sometimes with innovation, it's also put in either a nice to have or a bit difficult to implement box, Whereas I think if you asked any passenger now, as you just said, do you think having onboard, reliable, fast onboard Wi-Fi is innovative? I think they would say it's the most basic of their and fundamental of their expectations. So I think we need to kind of almost get past the innovation side of it. Think, no, this is a core ask of passengers, isn't it, and customers. So that's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, we will move on to our last panellist. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Martin. So Martin is Managing Director of Enotrack UK, which is a world-leading specialist rail engineering consultancy that provides technical expertise to the rail industry, crucially including on reducing electricity consumption and the associated costs. And of course we heard this morning already in the room about the kind of conundrum on the pathway to net zero. We're trying to move as quick as we can towards the greening of our transport fleets, whether that's electric trains, electric buses, electric cars. But of course, inherently that demands increased consumption. What are your thoughts about solutions, and what can we do about that to make sure we don't, for one step forward on that pathway to net zero, we're not taking kind of 3 steps back in terms of decarbonisation?
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, I've got a privilege here because I've got the final slot, which means I can pick up and weave in all those amazing insights and discussions that we've had. But I've also got a mandate, which is to give you a buzz of energy before you contemplate the weekend.
In song, remember.
And avoid the ornithon. So how will I do that? Okay, well, let's do a bit of silent participation from the audience then. So I'm just going to pose a couple of questions, and I want you to think about, what that conjures up. So I'm going to the first 2 words, rail decarbonisation. I'm going to see if I can read minds a little bit here as well. So I'm picking up diesels being banned by 2040. I'm picking up hydrogen trains, more electrification, battery trains, discontinuous electrification. That's what I'm kind of hearing. Okay, next question then. How long will it take for us to, as an industry, to benefit from those initiatives? I'm kind of hearing like a minimum of 7 years probably to introduce a new train, maybe 15 years to do the electric, to even plan and get the approval for the electrification. Battery trains, well, we know we've got some battery trains, but are they in service? How long will that be before we get those benefits? Hydrogen trains? Okay, I'm getting a real fuzz now. So obviously a long time. So when we look at the decarbonisation strategy of our industry, and we've got that from the Rail Delivery Group, we've got it from Network Rail, all these kind of decarbonisation strategies. We've got it from the operators, we've got it from infrastructure managers, and we can look to the European Rail Agency, we can look to Australia, we can look around the world, and they're all saying the same things. But there is an exception that I want to share with you. But before I do that, let's try and think of a little bit shorter term then. And if we want to think shorter term and think in more practical terms, and to kind of think about, how do we resolve that issue? We could probably start with CP6. That's in recent memory, and we've just started CP7. So the next question, what does it say about decarbonisation in CP6 and CP7? What are the main initiatives? So we've got air quality, very important. We've got reduction of waste and packaging. We've got switching the road fleet to electric vehicles, reducing the cost of powering buildings and so on. Now, so we've talked about and thought about these strategic, very long-term, expensive, and in some cases unproven, initiatives to reduce energy. But if we now think about in the more immediate term, even though those, you know, those initiatives that we've just thought about in terms of CP6, CP7 are very important, of course they are. How big is the impact in terms of decarbonisation? Like, you know, how important are they in terms of reducing the energy bill? Again, I'm kind of getting a bit of reading on that. And like, so the next question is, what is the biggest consumer in terms of a system or a component on the whole railway? I'm hearing traction motor. Thanks to so the traction motor is the thing that's powering the trains. It's the traction motor that's consuming all this traction power energy. So if we want to think about, you know, reducing consumption, so we can sort of address the issue of the, you know, the bigger demand and reducing carbon, but even reducing cost. Happily, it's the same thing. Shouldn't we do what we all do in the face of increasing electricity bills at home? Look at the most immediate things you can do, like, you know, turn the heating down or not have it on as much. Look at a different supplier. Look at different tariffs. So there are those opportunities, but, you know, we're missing out on those opportunities. So if the mandate now is to fix things fast, and if the problem currently or up until this point is that we're not doing that, what's the solution to that problem, that we're not fixing things fast? Well, to solve the problem, I think we probably have to look at the root causes. So probably most of you will be familiar with like the fourth railway package, which was, you know, it came from the European Rail Agency as a series of legislation which was introduced in 2016 to fully separate track from train. And you know, we have to abide by that. And you know, we've also seen since privatisation, you know, a lot of improvement, but the byproduct is fragmentation. And so, in terms of energy savings, we probably do. Well, we definitely do. We're picking up on what Peter was saying. We need a whole system approach. But the root cause of this lack of, you know, fixing things fast and achieving the fast savings and significant savings that are there now is this fragmentation of the industry, because all those measures that you see from individual players are all within their scope, and it doesn't talk about what you can do across the scope. There's a number of other root causes as well which kind of come from that. I would definitely concur with what Catherine said at the beginning, which is a lack of strategic thinking. There's also a lack of incentive. So we get the electricity bill, or Network Rail receives the electricity bill, divvies it up and passes it to the train operators, we pass it on to the DFT and the taxpayer pays it. So where's the incentive then for these fast and significant savings? It's probably a lot easier actually to write a strategy that's going to you know, bring the benefits and require any kind of real action, you know, well, you know, long into the future. So there's some of the root causes. So coming on to the solution then. So thanks for the introduction about Enertrack. So our parent company is in Switzerland. That's where probably about 70% of our activities are. So Switzerland is kind of an exception that we can use and probably learn from in terms of some of the measures that have been implemented and achieved. So in Switzerland, 100% of their railway is electrified. So they don't have to think about hydrogen, battery, electrification. I mean, it's a country, like helping to energise the minds of it. It's a country of amazing mountains and lakes, and as well as cheese and chocolate. But if you think about those mountains and lakes, that means that 60% of energy in Switzerland is green energy coming from hydroelectric. So they don't have to worry about that either. So in Switzerland, what they can concentrate on is fast, significant energy savings, which is also helped by the fact that 40% of their railway is run by private operators, and those private operators have got a mandate and a responsibility and an incentive for the whole railway, track, train, infrastructure, the whole thing. So that's what Enertrack do in Switzerland. You know, there's a lot of initiatives and, you know, operators that are really asking for support and achieving up to 25% savings. And we know we can do this in the UK as well. So I kind of very much welcome, you know, the new development, and in terms of a single guided mind, that's what we need for that whole system approach. But devolution is also very powerful as well, because it becomes more about practicalities than politics. It does mean that we can be focused on execution rather than strategy. You know, we heard earlier about, you know, sort of executing the plan and not just writing the strategy. And the 5 pillars from Labour as well, you know, to improve transport and also, you know, a green economy. Hopefully that was in 5 minutes. I think I'm kind of more or less there. But yeah, making rail affordable. I mean, it kind of ticks all the boxes. Those opportunities are there now. So you know, so I welcome working with the industry more to see how we can, you know, help the industry to achieve that.
Thanks, guys. That's actually, on that note, I should add that we were hoping to have an additional panellist to mix it up. Unfortunately, Caroline Stickland from Access for All couldn't join us today, and we were hoping that Caroline would be able to input a little bit further on the importance of accessibility under the new strategy, which is something that we haven't heard too much about so far from the new government, actually. We've heard a lot on kind of value for money and, you know, speed of delivery, but it will be interesting to see, yeah, how much that is baked in. So, but thank you very much for your thoughts and your time. Just open up to the floor. Does anybody have any questions for any of our panel?
Can I just, Katie, while you're waiting for people to gather their thoughts, just pick up this issue of timing and sort of delivering things quickly. You know, Martin mentioned it in his presentation that, you know, we need to get on and make things happen, and the new government has said it wants to do things. I hope to God they don't use the word at pace, because that got overutilised, and of course meant exactly the opposite with the previous administration.
Well, they have quite a lot.
Yeah, oh dear, slippery slope. But I detected a wee groan when I was challenged to how long is it going to take to actually get trains running on my railway. And you know, 6 years, 7 years. I could guarantee you that if it was a government-funded and Network Rail delivered scheme, it would be double that. It would be 12 to 14 years. You know, if you think of the lead time of things like Transpennine route upgrade, that's been in the planning. Well, I was involved doing it 10 years ago. You know, typically these schemes do take 15, 20 years, because by the time you get through the Department of Transport's approval processes, you've then got to go down the road to Treasury, who generally welcome you with the welcome of no, what's the question, and then you have to try and lobby, and then you have to all the rest of it. I would like to think that the private sector can do things quicker. They're more fleet of foot, they're more agile, and if things like planning can be accelerated as well to help us, then I think a lot of what the government wants to achieve can be delivered in a much faster time scale if we actually haven't got the dead hand of bureaucracy finding ways of not doing it rather than finding ways of doing it.
Interesting, we shall see. Let's watch this space. Tom, do you have a question, panel?
I think there was an impression given in the first decade or so after privatisation that, contrary to the other privatisation happened in the 80s and early 90s, in the railways, innovation took a long time to happen, longer than in almost any other privatised industry. It's my perception that it did happen eventually. My worry now is that whatever the new government is planning could pose a threat to that innovation. Do you think that is the case, or should we be more optimistic?
Personally, I think you should be optimistic, because the most innovative bits of the railway now are already in public ownership. I mean, LNER, Northern, Transpennine, bizarrely, because they're in the public sector, are allowed to innovate. I don't know whether it's just the government gives them loads of money or what it is. Probably is. They're probably just bribing. But it's odd that the lack of the commercial contracts in those areas, I think, has allowed those train companies to be very innovative, and that should, I would have thought, that should increase, because the more train companies they get in, the more innovative they can be, as long as the department and the Treasury will give them space. Because I think the key thing about the next phase of this is that at the moment the department and Treasury have got their paws on the tail of the rail industry. Now, do you remember that headline, civil servant gives up power? Doesn't happen very often, does it? Getting that power away from the department and the Treasury is going to be really difficult, and Great British Railways has got to get trust built up as quickly as possible. But with Hendy and whoever becomes the chief executive, those two not Hendy, whoever becomes the chair and the chief executive of Great British Railways, those are the two key appointments in Britain's railways for the next 10 years. You get the right two people, and they get the trust things are going to start changing really quickly. It's going to be very exciting. But you mustn't squeeze the private sector out for all the reasons that Mark said and all the reasons I hope that I said, is that private sector's got something to offer and it can move quickly. If Great British Railways builds its own retail platform, blimey, that's going to take some time. The department's got to sign it off, the Treasury's got to sign it off. You'll have one supplier, and they'll charge every time you want to, change the colour of the keyboard. That's a disastrous route to go down. Just let the private sector get on with it. They can sell. Just let them get on with it.
In terms of the private sector and certainly your members, I take it they're not bothered about their own branding, are they, in terms of their place in the network? Because obviously on the one hand, we've got the Metro Mayors trying to ensure that their newly integrated systems, so they hope that will be delivered shortly, will all be joined up, not just in terms of obviously modally and information, but with that integrated branding as well, so that passengers, a bit like TfL, you can, just from looking at the mode and that brand, you immediately know, right, it's part of this regional network. How do you think it would work having the, on one hand, it's common sense that there would be a one-stop shop GBR approach. What would you and your members say to that in terms of that kind of, for the passenger to know what they're going to get and where to go automatically when the branding all around the country is trying to be unified?
Well, I think the problem is that a lot of us are kind of hypermobile. We do lots of journeys on lots of networks all the time, and you're a bunch of freaks, frankly. The rest of the population is not like you. They tend to do very similar things day in, day out. They're not really worried about the branding of Avanti versus GNER. It's sort of they use one network properly. And I think the important thing for the future is that it makes total sense to have pay-as-you-go type arrangements in urban areas. I slightly worry when it goes beyond Zone 6 in London, because I think that there are elasticities of demand there which you can squash with pay-as-you-go. 26 quid from Reading's a lot. For a single commuter during the week, that's all right. Family at the weekend, that's not good. So it's islands and the bits that connect the islands. But no, I think our members are very worried about branding. And Trainline, has a very expensively a very powerful brand. My children think the railways are Trainline. And when you say there's all these other people involved, they're just mystified, but they couldn't care less.
We've got time for one more question.
I think, firstly, a comment on Anthony's point. Sorry, I'm Tim Burley from Eversholt Rail, rolling stock owner. The whole thing about freeing up train operators from the current constraints is an absolutely crucial one. Because at the moment, innovation, you get one chance a year with a train operator. They produce an annual business plan, which frankly, if it shows any increase in the cost line, DfT is likely to swap back and say, no, you're not doing that. If you miss that point in the cycle, any innovation has to wait another 12 months before the top can represent it. Now, it doesn't stop us in the private sector from doing stuff, and we've got a number of programmes going where we're investing sizable sums of money, but we're doing that in the areas where we can control our own destiny, but we aren't hidebound by what the department may need to approve. Eventually we'll get to the point, as applies with anything, it'll be interesting to see how the legislation shapes up, because at the moment anything that involves a change to a train operator's contract, even if it says it's a different type of rolling stock and you're trialling 2 units but at nil cost, has to go through the DfT approval cycle. Hopefully that's going to change under GBR, because that adds no value. Second one, which is the one on the question really, we've heard a lot in previous sessions and in this one about making it easy for people to buy tickets. To what extent do you think we're going to get to a point where it isn't just a rail ticket, it's a multimodal ticket with the flexibility, if something goes wrong either with the bus journey or the rural rail journey or the main line one, that it can be flexed and adapted. Is that a wish too far, or do you believe it could be achieved?
Anthony, have you got anything you want to say on that firstly? Or?
I think it's a great wish to have, that multimodal door-to-door ticketing. You need it in dense urban areas. I'm not sure you need it to go right across the country, to be honest, because those are rarer sort of journeys. I think we better walk before we run, and because if you try and if you try and boil the ocean, we're going to get nowhere. Let's just sort out rail ticketing first, and then we'll worry about the other bits. But don't shut the door to the multimodal. And it's interesting because at the moment, one of the greatest failings in transport is when you travel across London on a barcode, it doesn't work on TfL. I mean, how on earth could we have ended up as that as a public policy position? It's disastrous. You know, people have to go, you have to have members of staff open the gate for you, they don't really know what they're looking at, it's kind of weird. Hopefully we can have a better relationship between the urban centres and the National Rail Network.
But we've got a couple of examples in Europe where, of course, in Germany, they've famously introduced originally their €9 Deutschland ticket. It's now €49. Provides unlimited travel on local rail networks, all forms of public transport in towns and cities. And it's interesting, and okay, there is a government subsidy for that service, but you know there's beginning to develop a track record, and there'll be some good data coming out of how attractive that is. Is it generative, or is it abstractive? So I think watch that space. And of course in Luxembourg, God bless them, public transport is free. So that does away with the need for ticketing at all, which is probably something you may not want to support.
No comment. Just to close, really, was there any other remarks that you, Peter or Martin, wanted to make in view of those questions?
Well, can I just ask a rather important question that relates to today, actually, which is resilience? I mean, my daughter has just texted me to say she was going to take a Ryanair plane tonight, and now she can't. And it's an issue I've banged on about, and it's maybe something I'd like to hear Peter's view on. But you know, the world is in chaos out there. We're
in a little bubble here.
We're in a little bubble. But you know, there's no planes flying in America, and you know, and all sorts of other stuff happening.
It's a really good point. No, it's a very. I spent the first hour of this morning, I told Mark, on a business continuity call because luckily we're not affected. But what is happening, by hook or by crook, is there's a lot more software on rolling stock now, and that requires cybersecurity. Do we have the skills in the industry? Can we attract the skills to manage that? And at the moment, I'd say, we've got a way to go, and it is a risk. It's not just rail either, but we are part of critical national infrastructure. And therefore, I think there's, and it is, I notice it's in the digital bill, I think, cybersecurity features. What that will translate to, like all of this, what it'll actually translate into, I don't know. Certainly there's new European legislation as well, but it all comes with a cost. And as I say, the skills in-house to actually understand and interpret what rail has to do versus that set of legislation. But it's a constant threat, Christian, absolutely.
Okay.
My advice is print your photographs out, because in 3 years' time you won't be able to access any of them digitally because the cloud will have collapsed or something. So every year I print out half a dozen photographs because you know they're going to disappear.
I could take a while.
Yeah, exactly. Right, thank you, everyone. Okay, to stay seated just for a minute. Mark, would you like to make any closing remarks?
Well, diolch yn fawr, Katie, and thank you to the
Martin, thank you for coming on Calling All Stations and our first ever live broadcast. Let's start by I find out who exactly you are and who you're batting for.
Well, so I'm Chief Executive of Transport for the North. We cover the area from the Scottish borders down to the Midlands, so an area of about 17 million people. Of course, from a railway perspective, the heart and the sort of foundation of the railways started in the north.
Interesting. You count the Midlands as the north, do you?
Well, we come down towards sort of the parts of Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire.
Right.
So there's the services that come down there. So, but we're there on behalf of our partners, which are the civic leaders, the business leaders of the north. It's really about making the case for the north, realising the economic potential, of which transport is such an important part and an enabler of making that potential for not just businesses but also people.
Now, in terms of transport, I see from your website you're batting for all forms of transport, aren't you? You're, roads to rail and buses and whatever.
Absolutely, because I mean, transport is so fundamental. I mean, myself, I use trains regularly. I walk. I have my own car. So I think we have to understand as people. We use the transport we need or we have available sometimes for the journey we're going to make. Sometimes that can be dependent upon do you have access to it. Sometimes it could be about the weather, could be the type of trip you're going to make. So I think the more you think about, and this is what we're really trying to do now with the recently updated strategic transport plan, outcomes in places for people.
But in this day and age, is not sustainability kind of high on your agenda, and therefore there's a conflict between kind of batting for more roads and batting for railways?
It is definitely about changing or giving people better choices, different choices. So when we've done the work for Transport for the North on the longer term future for the North, the economic potential, something like £118 billion extra GVA per year if we get it right.
GVA?
That's gross value added, so that's a measure of the economy. Now, that means people are going to travel more. Businesses are going to travel more. So when we've set out the objectives, when we set out the targets in the transport plan, it's about keeping road levels at the current level, and it's realising the growth is going to be in making better public transport, whether it's buses, whether it's strategic rail. And if we have to remember the origins of what happened in the north, if we go back to the mid-2010s, it was this recognition that the economic uplift comes from having the great towns and cities of the north connected, and the most efficient and effective way to do that is by public transport and particularly rail.
Now, I've always argued, and I opposed HS2, but I've always argued that rather than going for HS2, there should have been a sort of network southeast of the north. In other words, all those towns, Hull, Liverpool, Leeds, Manchester, even Birmingham, should have been connected by rapid trains, electrified, running between all those places. Now, do you see that as a potential vision, even given all the problems that there has been over rail investment?
Well, the North has been very clear for the last 10, 15 years really on this. We have this, the business leaders came together, worked with the government of the day and came up with the proposal for the Northern Powerhouse Rail Network, which was about connecting east, west, north, south across the whole of the north in the way that I said about the towns and the cities. And that remains at the heart of the vision for the strategic transport plan, because it is that step change in connection and connectivity. Now, things like HS2, if we kind of take a step back,
I was going to come to that.
If we take a step back, what we're seeing now is we know that the connections beyond the north, whether it's the west coast or indeed the east coast, we've got limitations in terms of the capacity that we have at the moment. So if we're going to have that ambition to grow the economy collectively across the country, and we want to grow the rail contribution, we're still going to have to come back to what's the solution for additional capacity to connect the markets across the whole of the country.
But aren't you trying to have your cake and eat it there? Because you're basically saying you want this kind of better connectivity within the north, you want HS2 as well, but we kind of know the realpolitik of that is that it's unlikely you're going to get all of that. Should you not prioritise one of those demands?
I don't see why we have to, because the ultimate prize, as I say, come back to what the potential of the north is. 118 billion a year extra. That's the size, that's the potential, the opportunity for the north if you realise that growth. And so it's actually saying, do we want to invest in that potential? Do we want to realise that? And if you think about what we have in the north and more generally across the country, we have areas where there are undoubtedly there's economic growth. When we look at what's happening in Manchester at the moment, we're actually seeing an increase in productivity in the Greater Manchester area because of the long-term vision and leadership we've had by political and business leaders in that city region, and we're starting to see the benefits of that. Why can't we have that ambition and realise that potential across the whole of the north by connecting the towns and villages and cities together?
But that's the connection bit. But what about the HS2 bit? Do you need that connection down to London?
I think we need to think about what it is, what's the answer we're trying to solve? And I think that if I was to reflect upon the lessons to be learnt from High Speed 2, it was never really clear from day one what we were trying to achieve as outcomes. It was never really clear what are the priorities we have to make in terms of trade-offs. And I think that's perhaps something for us to reflect upon more generally across the rail sector, but more generally across transport, is if you have certain or have clarity about outcomes that you're trying to achieve, you can then empower those who are in places to design and develop proposals, knowing what it is they're trying to do, and you stop this second guessing, or you tweak the specification, and you know that every time you do that, you're going to incur delays and cost, and you're not going to realise the benefits. It's almost better to have deliver something 80% of it rather than deliver 100% of nothing.
Okay, so you're going to go knock on Lou Haig's door, and what are you going to tell her or ask for?
Well, I think we can be really, comforted by the fact throughout the election campaign we heard the new government talking about the importance of the northern rail infrastructure. And we've got, as I said, the focus around the Northern Powerhouse Rail Network. We've got elements being delivered already. Transpennine route upgrade, £12 billion worth of investment now starting. We've had some investment happening in and around the Greater Manchester area as a consequence of the Manchester Recovery Task Force. So we need to kind of keep the momentum going. And I think the first thing to do is actually get what we've got in train delivered. I think the other thing that we have to do, particularly in the north, and it's something that we've had to handle for a number of years now, unfortunately, is restore confidence in the public and the business community that the network is actually reliable and resilient, because for a variety of reasons, the level of performance we've had with either Transpennine or Northern just hasn't been up to scratch. Now, we've made progress with Transpennine, we've got some challenges at the moment with Northern. So we've got to get the basics right first, because then that gives the confidence back to people to use the network. That gives people the confidence to invest in the network.
The legislation is also for a buses bill. What would you like to see in that?
I think this is really, I think there's been a consensus around the bus sector for some time now. Again, if we go back to original where you started, Christian, people don't go out of their door thinking, oh, I'm only going to use the train, or I'm only going to use something else. They use it in different ways. And so having access to buses as well as rail. But here again, we've got to kind of just think about some of the challenges, because the reality is that for large parts of the north, and indeed large parts of the country, what we have seen in recent years is the decline in public transport, particularly buses. I think we've had something like a third more reductions in buses in the north than elsewhere in the country, and so maybe we need to think about the delivery model as well as the legislation. I think the legislation in empowering local authorities. We've got a particularly good example in the north. I mean, we've seen Mayor Burnham take forward franchising in Greater Manchester, maybe a little less visible on the radar. We've seen the municipally owned bus company in Warrington completely transform its bus fleet in 100% now EV buses. They've built the infrastructure around it. So we've seen elements of examples in some places. We've got Mayor Brabin, we've got Mayor Coppard also moving forward with franchising. But that's not going to be the model for some of the more traditional market towns and the rural areas. So we need to think about the best way of delivering a service that's affordable, and that might need a bit more flexibility. That's where I think giving local authorities the ability to have municipal bus companies gives that credibility. It also means you have to think about these things in a slightly different way. I often remember talking to somebody in the transport sector who talked to me about how a National Health Service had invested in gritting the pavements. And you kind of think, well, why is that? Because the savings in broken hips and broken legs far outweighs the cost of the gritting. And maybe we've got to stop thinking about transport as a means to an end, a cost, and thinking about transport as an enabler. Because if I do start looking at some of the more remote and more rural parts of the north, right here, right now, today, we've got something like 3.3 million people who are living in areas where they have very little choice because either they can't afford the transport or they don't have access to transport. 3.3, that's 20% of the North population. And that's not to say it's milk and honey everywhere else. Now those people have the same ambitions, the same hopes that we all have. It's just that transport is not able to help them realise that potential. And so we've got to start thinking about how we unlock people's potential as well as the economic potential. And that requires a different way of thinking, and that's certainly at the heart of the thinking that we've been doing at Transport for the North. We've done some work around transport-related social exclusion. 1 in 4 people, low-paid carers, 1 in 4 people are worried today whether they can afford to eat, let alone live, before you even start talking about transport. So our thinking as a transport professional, whether it's public transport or private transport, has to think about the person, the user. I know the Secretary of State has said she wants to be the passenger in chief. Well, that's great, because it's the user that we need to focus on.
And that's a very articulate representation. Could you not try to push for something like the right to transport? In other words, that everybody should be within reach of a bus service to the local town or something?
I think those ideas sometimes seem good on the surface. I think sometimes,
well, they do in Switzerland, basically.
I think sometimes you need to think about quite what the intended consequences. I think the focus is about understanding what are the opportunities and the potentials, what are the barriers within the communities, and then think about how you address that. I think that's what we've seen powerfully with the leadership that's come through devolution, directly elected mayors in the city regions, and increasingly beyond that. That single focal point is acting as a powerful driver for change. But what we've also got to remember is, across the north, because of the way, going back to the rail network, it works, if you start pulling at one bit of the rail network, it kind of ripples right across. And suddenly you've got a problem in Manchester manifesting itself in Newcastle, one in Leeds representing itself in Chester. So it's that combination of the leadership within the city regions coming together powerfully to get a network across the north.
So as a last point, devolution, you're a great supporter of that?
Absolutely, because what we've seen consistently is that leadership at a local level, that city region level, it's in tune with its community. And I think what we're seeing with the move towards single settlements for city regions, it empowers those closest to the community to understand how best to use that money to deliver for their people and their businesses.
Martin Tugwell, Chief Executive Transport of the North, thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you.
Didn't expect that. We're live.
Right, we're live. Right.
Brilliant chat.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Well done.
It's refreshments.
Yeah.
Perfect,
Yeah.
Martin. Thank you. Sorry, I was giving you a slightly hard time, but it makes it more right.
Questions?
Yeah, I was asking questions.
Tea and coffee are served, and then for those of you that can, do come back in at about 2:30, and we'll do the rest of the podcast. Thank you. In a moment, okay, because I haven't got a caption to hold up to say, you know, like in the old sitcom days, kind of, you know, or Generation Game or something like that. But no, it's sort of we'll get ready. So, are we rolling, Oliver, Phoebe? Okay, right, ready? No, not yet, not yet, not yet.
You're fired.
Cue. Yeah. Okay, right. After this, okay. Welcome to Calling All Stations Live. This is Mark Walker, and I'm with Christian Wolmar at the Cogitamus conference, which has been convened immediately after the publication of the King's Speech with the new government's legislative programme, and the publication subsequently of a railways bill amongst a raft of transport-related legislation that we're going to discuss in front of a live audience for the first time for Calling All Stations. Hello, Christian.
Hi there, I'm looking forward to this enormously, and there's a wonderful audience out there who will clap when we tell them to.
Absolutely, so we've got them well trained. Now, we haven't done an episode of Calling All Stations since before
June the 13th, the last one was.
Before the general election that took place, so an awful lot has happened in that intervening period.
Yes, including the general election, but it was quite a difficult period to do things. There wasn't, as ever, that much in the manifesto about transport, but what's interesting is that at least half a dozen of the bills have a major transport component, and so again, it was one of those things that is very rarely discussed. It's the dog that never barks. But it is quite an important part of their agenda. And interestingly enough, I think the Labour government has deliberately used the fact that they're going to take the franchises back in-house as a way of showing their radical edge, the renationalisation of the railways, as they put it, and we can discuss this because it really isn't quite a renationalisation of the railways. The renationalisation of the railways is something they're using as a totemic kind of aspect of their policies, showing that we are going to be radical and change things.
Now, what we should probably do, just to record for the purposes of history and for our international listeners, is that the Labour Party did win the general election held on the 4th of July, and subsequently a series of ministerial appointments were made. First of all, of course, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer was asked by the King to form an administration, but very notably Louise Haigh, the Member of Parliament for Sheffield Heeley, was appointed as Secretary of State for Transport, and 4 other ministers have been appointed into the government's transport team.
Including one big surprise.
One very notable name. Do expand.
Which is Lord Peter Hendy, who is really a guy who's been involved in transport. I've known him all the 30 years I've been writing about transport. Initially, he was the managing director of a bus company in London, and then he bought out that bus company, made a lot of money, enough money so that he has 2 route masters in his back garage. Then he went on to be the Transport Commissioner for London, and remarkably managed to survive the change between the Labour Mayor Ken Livingstone and the Tory Mayor Boris Johnson, and stayed for nearly the whole of Boris Johnson's 8 years, despite the fact, as I've pointed out in Rail magazine, despite the fact that Boris did some very silly things, like devising a very expensive bus that had 2 staircases and an entrance at the back, and initially it had a conductor, which you didn't need in kind of the 2010s and so on. But nevertheless, Peter kind of managed to kind of survive all that change, and then soon after he left Transport for London, he became the chairman of Network Rail, where he has been for ages. So he has experience in railways, he has experience in buses, he has experience of working in a major capital. So this is a pretty amazing appointment.
And of course, the appointment of Lord Hendy was one of a number of ministerial posts that were filled by people from outside of the regular kind of political community, either elected members of Parliament or existing peers
James
who
Timpson.
take the Labour whip.
James Timpson, who was the prisons minister, and so it's all part of the government of all talents, I think Gordon Brown called it.
And I think it's part as well of a sense through the 5 missions that the Labour Party has adopted of hitting the ground running, getting things going, delivering quickly on changes, reforms, so that people notice the difference.
And certainly, 2 weeks into this, we do see kind of a lot of activity. Whether that translates into successful legislation and real changes that affect people remains to be seen, but it's a good start.
And there was an important kind of mantra or slogan was adopted by the new Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, which was a twist on something that the tech bros say. So instead of move fast and break things, we have move fast and fix things.
Yes, I thought that was particularly clever. And she has set out a set of 5 kind of aims, very simple aims of just really putting passengers at the heart of it, but also helping motorists. And I think it's a motherhood and apple pie stuff. But I think it shows intent after this 14 years of rather kind of troubled times in transport.
So we're at the Cogitamus conference today, which we've organised jointly with the Rail Forum, which was arranged in anticipation of the possibility of some transport and rail legislation emerging from the King's Speech, which had been scheduled for Wednesday, the 17th of July. Now, again, perhaps for some of our international listeners, the King's Speech is an address given by the monarch in Parliament on behalf of the government. It's a curious phenomenon when the apolitical, non-political monarch reads out the political pledges of his government, his ministers. And we were slightly on edge in relation to transport, because what we've been used to over the last several years are lots of promises on transport reform and legislation, but often replaced by lots of consultations, in fact endless rounds of consultation. And this culminated just before the general election was called, when the House of Commons Transport Committee completed its consideration not of a rail reform bill, but of a draft rail reform bill. And on the very day that process was concluded, the then Prime Minister Rishi Sunak called the general election, meaning that process will never now see the light of day unless some aspects of it are picked up by Labour.
Well, Labour have taken exactly the opposite approach, because they realised that having a railways bill with everything in it was going to be very complicated. Remember, the Railways Act 1993, I think, which privatised the railways, was one of the most biggest bills ever, if not the biggest bill ever. So they've split it up rather interestingly. So there's going to be a short railways bill that will only address really the current situation and enable this new organisation, Great British Railways. Actually, it doesn't actually quite create it. So it will just enable the franchises to be ended.
So this is the Passenger Railway Services Public Ownership Bill.
Right, a memorable title. And so that's a kind of enabling bill which will just say we have the right to terminate these franchises, and importantly, the franchises, or whatever they are, contracts they will be, can be run by the public sector, which the Railways Act and in its subsequent enactions did not kind of allow. So that's the key point. And then later on, and we don't quite know when, there'll be a longer railways bill which will create Great British Railways and the whole new structure. Have I got that right?
You're absolutely spot on.
Right.
But our cup runneth over with railways and transport legislation, because in the King's Speech we also have a pledge to repurpose the legislation that was going through the previous Parliament to extend HS2, the high-speed railway from Crewe to Manchester. Although the new government has confirmed that it won't reverse the decision to cancel the northern sections of HS2, it does intend to use that bill in some way, as yet undefined, to facilitate further rail enhancements in the north of England.
Yeah, there was some disappointment amongst some people in the north about the fact that they haven't decided to reverse that. But remember, the legislation to build it still remains on the statute book.
As far as Crewe.
As far as Crewe, right? So
yes.
and this new bill, which we don't know what will look like, will essentially be amendments to that. And there are all sorts of ideas flying about building bits of line to kind of bypass the busiest bits or enable kind of services to be speeded up. Stuff to Handsacre Junction, which is going to become famous. Handsacre Junction is basically where the HS2 rejoins the West Coast Main Line, and so there'll have to be necessary changes to the work there to enable trains to go from HS2 further north and so on. So this is for discussion. It also does show some intent, because they could have just ignored that and they could have not done anything. But they're basically saying, we're going to do something, and we're going to do something for the north.
And then, in addition, we have a planning and infrastructure bill, which deals not just with transport infrastructure, but much more widely the government's burning desire to address the shortcomings in the planning process when it comes, for example, to housing developments and to national grid infrastructure and other major infrastructure projects, which we seem in this country to be very good at delaying until eventually nothing happens at all.
Well, that's a centrepiece of their whole strategy, isn't it? And this is not an easy one, is it? Because there are NIMBYs everywhere, and essentially you have a decision to make here. Either you have a stronger central planning authority, and actually already this government structure we have in the UK has a very strong centre and rather weak local government. So are they going to then strengthen the centre's ability to ride roughshod over local people? Or are they going to empower local authorities to contribute towards this process? What exactly does it mean to sort out the planning process? They're going to find it very politically difficult, and they're going to lose some support over this when they decide to, build something on what they call grey land, but in fact it might be, green land.
Answers on a postcard, please.
Yes.
So the other legislation that we have, very importantly, we have a Better Buses Bill promised in the King's Speech, which will extend the powers to introduce franchised networks more extensively across England and allow local authorities to own or set up their own bus companies.
Yes, that was banned. That was
prohibited
banned.
from
yes,
doing.
that was a ban. But what happened actually was that there are bus companies in Reading and Warrington and a few other places that are owned by the local authorities and survived the kind of near 30 years of privatisation. They never got bought out by Stagecoach or Go Ahead or whatever. And actually they generally win all the prizes in the competitions for the best bus network. Surprise, surprise. So they're going to point to that and say, look, this is a better way of running buses. They're going to encourage local authorities to set up new bus companies. Not an easy thing to do, but I think it will be something that will enable them to run, they hope, buses more cheaply and blend them in with kind of other local services.
We're still not done with the transport-related legislation because there's a promise of an English devolution bill, previously known as the Take Back Control Bill, which will ensure greater devolution of powers to metropolitan city region governments in England, but also to other forms of local authority.
Well, in the interview that we've got later on with Martin Tugwell, the head of transport in the north, he's going to explain how important this is and how enabling more devolution is undoubtedly something that will encourage a lot of local authorities to come up with better ideas. The big question is over money, and that's something we've discussed at this conference, and it's still unclear how much money will go with these extra powers, and that might be the worst of all worlds, is to give these powers to local authorities but not kind of enable them with money.
And then finally, last but by no means least, in an industry, the transport industry is being ever more reliant on digital connectivity and data, there is to be a digital information and smart data bill. And digital and data is something that we've been discussing today in relation to the railways at this very conference.
Well, not least because today is the day when this Microsoft CrowdStrike bug has appeared across the world and has prevented planes from flying, has delayed trains, has led to general chaos, and shows that certainly resilience needs to be built into the system in a much better way. It's something I've written about in Rail Magazine, and I've always been concerned about. You know, the question I've always wanted to know is what happens if the internet goes off? You know, will all the trains stop? And it does seem that if the internet goes off, certainly a lot of things stop, or certainly a lot of chaos is caused. So a very relevant kind of piece of legislation, which will again have to go into great detail.
Sorry, it's dried up.
Well, that's it.
No, quite. No, next bit. Okay. So, Christian, you mentioned that while we've been at the Rail Conference, the Cogitamus and Rail Forum Conference, all change today, you took the opportunity to conduct an extended interview with Martin Tugwell, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Transport for the North.
Yes, indeed, and I think it's very enlightening, and certainly I think it will show just how important the North will be in the future government's plans.
And here it is. Okay, so we've done that bit.
Right.
So then, would any audience participation, does anybody have a question that you'd like to raise as part of the Calling All Stations podcast, or a point you'd like to make?
So this is how the sausage is made.
Yeah, something like that. No obligation. I'm sure many of you are thinking it's now time for a drink. In which case, I'm just going to do the credits, okay? Because we'll finish Martin's interview, and then we'll do the credits.
And it'll get all edited by our wonderful
editing team. But this one will be on video as well as audio for the first time. Sorry, we got Thor from the Departure Lounge. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we've got one.
Yes,
we've got one.
Yes, I'm sure I can gen up.
Has to edit it, by the way.
I can gen up a thing. Well, I suppose I've rather wasted it now. But the day about digital, digital problems.
Yeah.
That's a bit wasted.
Well, there's loads going on in transport. Come on, think of something.
Why don't you do something about this outage today?
Well, that's what I just said. Yeah, that's what I
just
did it.
Look, hey, we can record that. We can record.
No. Let's do it. I know something. Yeah. I've got something.
Come on.
Okay.
Hang on. I'm going to introduce you. Here's Christian's final thought from the Departure Lounge.
Well, one of the interesting things that came up in the conference was I was talking to. Sorry, what's your second name?
Mark Livick.
No, not you, I'm afraid. You're sacked. Peter? Kingsley.
We'll take it from the top. Okay, right. Here's Christian's final thought from the Departure Lounge.
Well, one of the things that emerged in the conference, which I thought was very interesting, was how will this new government and its new body, Great British Railways, work, and how will it deliver things for the passenger? And I was talking to Peter Kingsland, who runs a company called Icomera, which provides basically Wi-Fi services for trains, and we've mentioned this issue before. And it's one of the things where Wi-Fi is pretty useless on trains, although 25 to 30% of people use it. And he was telling me how this new body should actually take over negotiating the services for the whole rail network. It will get a much better deal from the mobile network companies. This is what happens abroad, where actually usage of Wi-Fi systems is much greater because it's much more efficient and it's a much better service. And so I think that's a simple way in which Great British Railways can show that it's making things better for the passenger.
Okay.
Right.
And now, actually, go on. So, and then I'm just going to do the last bit, and after the word pod, that's your cue to clap. Okay, all right. So,
all stations pod.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Calling All Stations, the Transport Podcast with Christian Wolmar, is produced by Cogitamus Limited, a leading provider of public affairs consultancy services in the sector. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, do consider giving us a 5-star rating with whichever platform you use. Do follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. Our handle is @AllStationsPod. Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, technical team over there. Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah. And that's the end, folks.
Look, in your old age, when you're talking to your grandchildren, you'll be able to say you were at the first recording of Calling All Stations.
Yeah.
Yeah.